Chapter 351. Fifth update. Poplar Fruit went to school today and asked Fong Bei to take care of Kiki. Then, you want to find the dean, Chun Zongdai, to report the results of his studies during this period of time. Chun Zongdai was very satisfied with Poplar Fruit's performance after returning from his hometown. This was not only because Poplar Fruit was diligent in going to school, but also because Poplar Fruit's study progress was almost 1,000 miles a day. This was much faster than Chun Zongdai's original estimate. He originally thought that Poplar Fruit would study for a year as a postgraduate student and then bring him along to work on projects. However, judging from Poplar Fruit's mastery of linguistics, Chun Zongdai calculated that Poplar Fruit could become his right-hand man around the next semester. However, I am not very satisfied with your so-called reward. In addition to being satisfied, Chun Zongdai was also quite dissatisfied with Poplar Fruit preparation of 2 Bali travel spots for the students during the class. Although you have stimulated their enthusiasm to learn to a certain extent, where do you put the other teachers? They are not as generous as you, and it is impossible for the Institute to allocate money in this area. There are several teachers who came to me to complain about you. Although Chun Zongdai scolded Poplar Fruit for this proud disciple, Chun Zongdai still made a strong performance of protecting him and rejected the teachers who came to complain one by one. I am sorry, Dean. I didn't think about it thoroughly and brought you trouble. Poplar Fruit thought about it after the class and felt that it was indeed a bit inappropriate. However, the words that were said were like spilled water, and there was no way to take it back. How about we deal with it like this? Dean, what do you think? Poplar Fruit scratched his head, and an idea came up his mind. He said, this time, we will use the name of Shinda Translation and say that Shinda Translation wants to promote their influence. So they organize a competition among the students, and the winner will get the opportunity to travel abroad. Can you persuade Shinda? Chun Zongdai raised his head and looked at Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit had told him before, and Chun Zongdai still knew that Poplar Fruit had a certain say in Shinda Translation. I will fund the whole process, but the name will be used, which is equivalent to advertising for Shinda for free. I don't think they will refuse. Yang smiled and said, just treat it as an experiment. If it works out well in the future, we'll discuss it again. Chun Zongdai nodded slightly, then shook his head and said, this is the only time. Don't do this in class again. It is a good thing to stimulate the students' motivation to learn, but learning for the sake of money will only insult learning and the campus. Chun Zongdai's straightforward lecture made Poplar Fruit scratch his head awkwardly and say, Dean, you are right. We will not do it again. It is too extreme to say that we will not do it again. Chun Zongdai smiled at Poplar Fruit and said, I know that you must be scolding this old man in your heart for being stubborn. No, how would I dare? Poplar Fruit shook his head vigorously. Although he did not completely agree with Chun Zongdai's point of view, he did not have a trace of complaint in his heart. This old man is old, but it is not outdated. Chun Zongdai ignored Poplar Fruit's denial and said with a smile, now knowledge is money, and money is the foundation of modern people's survival. If you don't want to make money and don't consider the market, then you'll be digging yourself into a dead end. I know that too. Chun Zongdai knocked on the table and asked, language majors are not unpopular, but they're not popular either. Why? Because it is not easy to find a job. Poplar Fruit guessed. Wrong. Chun Zongdai shook his head and said, our college's employment rate has always been ranked at the top of the school. Take English as an example. If you learn English, you could do almost anything. Foreign trade, secretarial work, editing, sales, and so on. There are no boundaries in all professions. As you students often say, it is a jack of all trades. Poplar Fruit nodded. He had heard of this when he was an undergraduate. He asked doubtfully, then why? Because it is not easy to make money. Chun Zongdai laughed and said, building houses and real estate in civil engineering make a lot of money, not to mention management and finance. Even IT programmers who have just graduated have 3 or 4 times the salary of our majors. Look at language majors. How many of them can become big bosses? Jack Ma is one. Poplar Fruit kindly reminded, Taobao, Alibaba, They are now worth tens of billions. Don't argue with me. Chun Zongdai waved his hand angrily and said, "How many Jack Ma are there in China? I'm talking about a common phenomenon." Poplar Fruit shut his mouth in time. There is no cap. We only have so much energy to do translation. No matter how good we are, there is no way to make a lot of money. Chun Zongdai sighed and said, "That is why our majors are not as popular as they are now." Hey, where was I? After being interrupted by Poplar Fruit several times, Chun Zongdai realized that he had gone off topic. "You can't do this kind of reward test in class," Poplar Fruit reminded. "Yes, we are scholars. We have to maintain the integrity of scholars. We can't easily bend the knee to money. Otherwise, what is the difference between us and the training institutions outside?" Chun Zongdai showed his worship of the ivory tower at this time. He went back and forth, and Poplar Fruit felt a little confused. However, it does not mean that your starting point and your idea are wrong. Chun Zongdai blinked and said slyly, "On the contrary, your idea is very good. If Xinda Translation can cooperate with some clubs like the Student Union to provide students with after-school activities that can stimulate their enthusiasm for learning, the college will raise both hands in support." The older the ginger, the spicier it was. Poplar Fruit suddenly understood. It was not suitable for the government to do something that involved money, but if it was planned with the Student Union, then it was a different matter. At the same time, Poplar Fruit also saw that the dean was protecting him. First, he wanted to separate himself from this matter so that he would not become a target of public criticism for being unconventional. Second, he did not want him to pay out of his own pocket for no reason and benefit Xinda Translation. He also wanted to involve the outside world so that the students could have the opportunity to train and grow. In this regard, Poplar Fruit silently gave the dean, Chun Zongdai, a thumbs up. The old man and the young man smiled meaningfully. Later, Poplar Fruit did indeed follow the dean's suggestion and told Yao Dahua about this matter. This time, Poplar Fruit still paid out of his own pocket for the French class competition. Yao Dahua found a team in the company to be in charge of this project. As for the results of the experiment, whether this plan would continue or not, that was a matter for another day. There will be 10 chapters today, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor, greater than over equal to. Chapter 352. Sixth update. After leaving the school building, Poplar Fruit did not plan to go straight back to find Fong Bei. Instead, he took advantage of the fact that Kiki was being taken care of by Fong Bei to find a place where he could confess to Fong Bei in the future. Driving the Land Rover, Poplar Fruit wandered around the streets near the school. Whenever he came across a decent-sized restaurant, he would turn into it to ask and check. The restaurant that Poplar Fruit wanted to find had to have a large private room. If it was a room that could only fit a table, Poplar Fruit would not even have a place to stand. How could he confess? Secondly, the room had to have a display that could play videos. Many high-class hotels had televisions in their rooms. There were hanging ones, standing ones, old ones, and many other types. However, Yanghua found a few rooms that could only be used to watch TV. There was no way to connect to external storage devices to play videos. Some restaurants could hold weddings in the hall, but Poplar Fruit did not want to confess in the hall. Because the hall was too ostentatious and looked very extravagant, Fong Bei would definitely not like it. Another requirement was that the restaurant had to have food that could satisfy Poplar Fruit. This was an extravagant request of a foodie like Poplar Fruit. However, since the first two requirements could not be met, Poplar Fruit did not have the opportunity to consider the third requirement. The previous one was not bad. I could play videos, but the owner was too unreasonable. He refused to cooperate. Are you afraid that I will tear down your restaurant or what? Poplar Fruit drove the car and muttered to himself as he drove to the next destination. The next restaurant was a little further away. It would take about 10 minutes to drive around. However, it was close to the river and had an antique atmosphere. It was quite beautiful. The name was also not bad. It was called Immortal Village Fish House. Poplar Fruit stopped the car and stood in the parking lot in front of the restaurant. He shook his head as he read the words on the signboard. Only then did he walk in leisurely. The moment he entered the hall, Poplar Fruit was greeted by a smiling receptionist. Recently, Poplar Fruit's temperament had become more and more elegant. Although he was still not very particular about the clothes he wore, he began to buy better clothes without paying too much attention to the price. He no longer bought those street stalls, so he looked like an elegant young master, especially when he had just gotten off the Land Rover. Any greeter who had a good, I would not let go of such a rich guest. "How many of you are there, sir?" The hostess, who was wearing a chong sam and high heels, asked with a smile. "Oh, I'm not going to eat here. I just want to take a look at the rooms here." Poplar Fruit smiled. His deep, starry eyes made the receptionist a little dazed. "If your private room is suitable, I would like to reserve it. I will need it in a few days." The hostess blushed a little because of her performance just now, but fortunately, the light blush covered her expression. She recovered her professional smile and asked, "Sir, what kind of room do you need?" Poplar Fruit did not answer her. He was stunned. Just now, he lowered his head to talk to the hostess. When he raised his head to look at the restaurant, he inadvertently saw a familiar figure. Although when Poplar Fruit raised his head, she had just gone upstairs and disappeared around the corner of the stairs. But with that figure and long hair, Poplar Fruit was very sure that it was Duan Xueqing. "What is she doing here?" Poplar Fruit muttered in his heart. "It's still working hours." Poplar Fruit noticed that walking together with Duan Xueqing was a medium-sized fat man and a middle-aged man in a suit with shiny hair. "Sir? Sir?" The hostess noticed that Poplar Fruit was distracted while talking to her, so she helplessly reminded him. Oh. Poplar Fruit came back to his senses and asked, "What kind of rooms do you have?" Poplar Fruit found his own reason. He remembered that Duan Xueqing was busy with work during this period of time and thought she should be out to meet a client, right? Eating a meal is very normal for these government workers. "We have small rooms, medium rooms, big rooms, and couple suites." The hostess replied with a smile. "How big is the medium room? How big is the big room?" Poplar Fruit directly skipped the small room and couple suites. The minimum cost for a medium room is $788, suitable for 5 to 12 people. For the big room, there are 2 tables, which is twice as much as a medium room. The minimum cost is $1,688. The hostess smiled. From a conversation with Poplar Fruit, this was indeed a rich guest. The medium room was probably a bit small, if it could only fit 1 table. Poplar Fruit said, "How about this? Take me to see the big room, or if you are busy, tell me where it is, and I will go see the big room myself." After going to so many restaurants, Poplar Fruit realized that seeing was believing. "Not busy. It is our duty to serve you." The hostess smiled sweetly. She asked her companion to help look after the entrance, then took Poplar Fruit to the 2nd floor. Following behind the hostess who was swaying her hips, Poplar Fruit purposely glanced at the corridor and didn't see any sign of Duan Xueqing. She probably went into a private room, so he didn't disturb her. The hostess opened the door of a private room with a spring sunshine sign hanging on the door, smiled and said, "Sir, this is our big room." "Let me see." Poplar Fruit walked past the hostess and entered the big room. To Poplar Fruit's disappointment, the 2 tables were placed together and there wasn't much space left. "If I only need 1 table, can you move 1 table away?" Poplar Fruit turned around and asked, "The minimum cost is still according to your standards? This is not a problem." "Sure." The hostess smiled. This wasn't a big deal. If there were less people coming to eat, but they paid the same amount of money, the restaurant would be happier. That was still acceptable. 1 less table was more than enough space for him. "Can this TV be used?" Poplar Fruit touched the display hanging in the middle of the wall and asked. "Yes." The hostess quickly went up and turned on the TV. "What I mean is, can I look at my own videos?" Poplar Fruit explained. The hostess was dumbfounded by Poplar Fruit's question. She didn't understand such a technical question. "I have to ask," the hostess said embarrassedly. Poplar Fruit followed her out of the room. She wanted to go downstairs and ask the manager or other relevant personnel. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "It's okay, you go and ask. I'll wait for your reply." Poplar Fruit stood in the corridor on the 2nd floor and paced back and forth. He felt a little anxious to go to the toilet. There was a toilet in the private room, but now that the hostess wasn't there, Poplar Fruit was embarrassed to open the door and use it himself. It wouldn't be good if it caused a misunderstanding. The toilet on this floor wasn't far. Poplar Fruit found it after 2 steps. He pushed open the door of the men's toilet and walked in. There will be 10 chapters today, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor, greater than over equal to. Chapter 353. 7th update. This restaurant's toilet decoration is not bad. The tiled floor and marble sink are shiny. The sanitary conditions are also good. However, there are not enough standing places to pee. When Poplar Fruit went in, there were 2 people standing there. Poplar Fruit glanced at them, and without waiting, he walked into a squatting hole inside. Because it's just pee, Poplar Fruit did not close the door, but only slightly closed it. After Poplar Fruit left the school, he did not go to the toilet for more than 2 hours. This time, he held it in for a long time. After peeing, Poplar Fruit comfortably shook and gently breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he zipped up his pants and prepared to flush. The 2 people from before have already gone out, only to hear the toilet door clanging, followed by 2 sets of footsteps. 2 more people came in. Poplar Fruit's hand that was about to reach the flush valve has not yet pressed it, but he retracted his hand, because the words of the 2 people who just came in attracted Poplar Fruit's attention. Hee, I say, Director Goo, you're really good at doing things. You even managed to get such a beautiful female subordinate for you. A slightly flattering voice was complimenting. Hey, what's this? Old Wong, when I was in the town, that little girl, didn't she come to me with a wave of my hand? The man called Director Goo proudly smiled and said, Now, this is a bit troublesome, but the harder it is to get, the more delicious it is. Poplar Fruit was disgusted by their vulgar conversation. He guessed that the 2 people outside are not good people, so he did not want to go out and bump into them. He waited for them to leave before going out. Director Goo, that beauty, you've tried so many times but failed. Isn't she the world's top delicacy? The man called Old Wong laughed, but in the end, you have a way. If it were me, seeing this thorny rose, I wouldn't want to lay my hands on her. The more Poplar Fruit listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. He frowned and quietly turned on the recording function of his phone. What do you know? Director Goo said disdainfully. The colder and more reserved this kind of woman is, the more annoying she is. Once he gets his hands on her, he'll be dead set on her. Didn't you not pick up my calls and avoid me everywhere? Director Goo said proudly. Look, I just casually gave an executive order, and she will obediently come out with me. Of course. Your methods are brilliant. I admire you from the bottom of my heart. Old Wong said respectfully. Did you bring everything? It wasn't easy to trick her into coming out. Don't tell me you've forgotten? Director Goo asked after the sound of water being released. How could I? I could forget anything but you. Lao Wong laughed. Here, your ecstasy powder. I've already used up the last one. I asked my friend to bring this one back from Sioux Country. I've tried it. It's still the same formula and the same effect. The name ecstasy powder is too vulgar. Director Goo said with some infatuation. I think it should be called Charming Little Yellow Pill. Mix it with wine, and even the gods will be mesmerized by you. Yes, you're really too talented. This name is too good. Old Wong's compliment gave Poplar Fruit goosebumps. The sound of turning on the faucet and washing their hands could be heard. The 2 of them walked out of the bathroom as they did so. Don't talk nonsense. Quickly book a room and bring it over. Set up a camera there. After tonight, let's see if she still dares to be stubborn. Director Goo said with a smile. Oh, it seems like Director Goo is going to get another obedient slave. Old Wong, congratulate you in advance for your success. Haha, just watch. Watch how I subdue that bitch surnamed Duan. Director Goo's voice drifted in when the door of the toilet was pushed open and closed. Duan. Poplar Fruit's eyes suddenly widened. After listening to their conversation, Poplar Fruit felt that something was wrong. Now, with this information, Poplar Fruit was sure that the woman these 2 dirty men were plotting against was Duan Xueching. Originally, Poplar Fruit recorded the conversation to call the police. Then, through the police's channels, he would be able to catch the two men and catch them red-handed. But now he couldn't. The person they were trying to seduce was Duan Xiueqing. Poplar Fruit wouldn't let this happen. He wouldn't let these two despicable people taint Duan Xiueqing's innocence. Even if it was just an attempt, he wouldn't allow it. Poplar Fruit hurriedly put away his phone, pushed open the cubicle door, and chased after them. Just as he pushed open the door of the toilet, the receptionist walked in from the corridor. Behind her was an electrician carrying an old green satchel. When she saw Poplar Fruit, she said in surprise, "Sir, so you're here. I was wondering why I couldn't find you anywhere." Poplar Fruit turned his head to look at the corridor on both sides, but he realized that the two men were long gone. "This is our engineer, Lee. I just asked him, and he said that your request isn't difficult to fulfill. He brought an adapter, and he can help us see if we can use the TV to broadcast your video," the receptionist said happily. However, Poplar Fruit wasn't in the mood to listen to her. He urgently needed to find Duan Xiueqing and save her from this dangerous situation. Poplar Fruit walked up and grabbed the receptionist's shoulders. He anxiously asked, "Did you see the two men who just left? Which room were they in?" The receptionist was shaken by him. She was a little confused and didn't answer for a while. "Forget it. I'll find them myself." Poplar Fruit anxiously let go of the receptionist, pushed the electrician away, and went to the left. They can't be that fast. They must be nearby. Although Poplar Fruit was very anxious, he still analyzed clearly. He pushed open the door of the first room on the left. It was empty. In the second room, there were a few men eating. Poplar Fruit suddenly pushed open the door. They were shocked and looked at Poplar Fruit in unison. Poplar Fruit didn't have time to apologize. He slammed the door and went to the third room. Sir, you can't do this. You'll cause trouble for our other guests." The receptionist woke up at this time. She quickly lifted the hem of her Chong Sam and chased after him with small steps. "I have something urgent." Poplar Fruit didn't have time to explain. He quickly pushed open the door of the third room. That's not it. There was a family in this room. There was no sign of Duan Xiueqing. I'm sorry. The receptionist apologized for Poplar Fruit and chased after Poplar Fruit to stop him. After opening 7 rooms, Poplar Fruit still couldn't find Duan Xiueqing. He turned his head and looked in the other direction. She must be in that room. At this time, the electrician opened his hand and blocked Poplar Fruit's way. He said seriously, "Sir, please don't make trouble. You've already affected our business. If you make trouble again, we'll call the police." Chapter 354. 8th update. Get out of the way. Poplar Fruit brushed past the greeter like the wind. Even the electrician was pushed away by him angrily. Poplar Fruit was so strong that the electrician, who was not strong, staggered and almost fell to the ground. In the private room on the right side of the corridor, Poplar Fruit pushed open 2 doors, but he did not see Duan Xiueqing. Worried that Duan Xiueqing had drunk the drugged wine, he became more and more anxious. When he came to the third door, Poplar Fruit had lost his mind. He twisted the door handle and kicked it open. Let's stop at Poplar Fruit's point of view for a moment. Let's return to Duan Xiueqing's private room a few minutes ago. Duan Xiueqing was helpless. Since the beginning of the year, after the female leader who had doted on her was transferred, the new director Gu had been eyeing her at first sight. Director Gu's name was Gu Shida. It was said that his family had some background. Duan Xiueqing did not know what kind of background he had, and she was not interested in knowing. However, this average-looking, fat guy was very arrogant and domineering in Duan Xiueqing's unit. Duan Xiueqing was too lazy to pay attention to him. At most, she would avoid him. However, he was also very lecherous. All day long, his eyes were lecherously looking at the female colleagues in the unit who had a slightly better figure. Duan Xiueqing, who was young and beautiful like a fairy, became his primary target. From time to time, he would run to Duan Xiueqing's desk to guide her work. After work, he would not forget to ask Duan Xiueqing out to eat, drink, and have fun. After picking up the phone twice, Duan Xiueqing hung up every time she saw his number and ignored it. Seeing Gu Shida's fat pig head and Mediterranean hairstyle, Duan Xueqing wanted to vomit. However, after all, he was her immediate superior. Duan Xueqing swallowed his anger and buried herself in work. Today, Duan Xueqing was really tricked by Gu Shida. He said in the office that he was going to inspect a company in his district today. He asked Duan Xueqing to go with him. Such field trips were not uncommon. Other people had been there before. Duan Xueqing just had to follow him out. In the end, after half an hour of inspection, he came out with the owner of the building materials company, Wang Changyuan, to have lunch. Duan Xueqing had no choice but to follow them to the restaurant. As soon as they ordered, the two of them went to the bathroom. The dishes were not served yet, but 2 bottles of red wine were served. As soon as Wang Changyuan came back, he opened a bottle of red wine and said with a smile, "Come, let's drink some red wine first." After that, he poured 3 glasses. "You don't have to pour for me." Duan Xueqing quickly waved her hand and said, "I don't drink. You came out with your boss. Are you not giving me face?" Wang Changyuan deliberately pretended to be very unhappy. Gu Shida, who was a little impatient, took a glass of red wine from the glass turntable. Under the cover of his sleeve, a small yellow pill slipped through his fingers into the wine glass. With a gentle shake, most of it dissolved. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see it at all. "Drink a little. You see, Boss Wang is angry." Gu Shida pushed the red wine in front of Duan Xueqing and said hypocritically, "Sorry, I don't drink." Duan Xueqing shook her head and said firmly, "Why are you so stubborn?" Gu Shida said unhappily, "I'm not asking you to drink as much as you want. It's work time. Do you want to get drunk? Drink a little. Just treat it as an appetizer before the meal. Everyone will be happy. You see, Xiao Duan, you don't know how to behave." Wang Changyuan shook the red wine in his glass slightly, took a sip, and said, "We drink red wine because it's good for our health, especially for female comrades. Drinking red wine can make you look beautiful. If we really want to drink, why would we ask a female comrade to drink with us? Why would we drink this soft red wine? How can you do a good job like this? You see, Boss Wang has criticized you. Why don't you drink a glass to apologize?" Gu Shida said hypocritically. Bang! It was a loud noise. Wang Changyuan was so scared that the goblet in his hand shook, and some red wine spilled on his hand. Poplar Fruit kicked open the door of the private room. Without looking around, he saw Duan Xueqing sitting there looking at him in surprise. Looking around, the situation in the private room was clear at a glance. Poplar Fruit saw the 2 men walking with Duan Xueqing. They were the fat man and the waxy man. The situation at the table was also very clear. The fat man was persuading Duan Xueqing to drink. "Who are you? Why did you kick our door?" The waxy man put down the goblet in his hand. He didn't have time to wipe the red wine off his hand before he stood up and asked angrily. That's the voice. Poplar Fruit knew that the voice belonged to Lao Wang, who was helping the evildoer in the toilet. Then, the fat man sitting in the main seat was the so-called Director Gu. Poplar Fruit lowered his eyes and looked at the red wine that the fat man had stretched out in front of Duan Xueqing. He thought of the 2 men's conspiracy in the toilet, and his eyes widened. If he guessed correctly, this glass of red wine must have been drugged. Fortunately, he made it in time. Duan Xueqing hadn't drunk it yet. Although she hadn't drunk it yet, Poplar Fruit's chest was burning with anger. On the one hand, his anger was related to Duan Xueqing. These 2 people wanted to make a move on Duan Xueqing and use such despicable means. How could Poplar Fruit not be angry? On the other hand, this drugging incident reminded him of Wu Yu. Wasn't Wu Yu also drugged by the young master in her company? Otherwise, how could there be a misunderstanding with him that night? "Who are you?" Gu Shida stood up and pointed at Poplar Fruit. "Is this hotel going to continue? Can any random person barge in?" "Director, he is..." Duan Xueqing was worried that Gu Shida would vent his anger on Poplar Fruit, so she quickly stood up and explained. Poplar Fruit interrupted Duan Xueqing's words. He stared coldly at Gu Shida and said, "Director Gu, right? I'm Xueqing's brother. Xueqing, let's go." Poplar Fruit walked over and pulled Duan Xueqing out of the room. Duan Shueching was still a little confused by a sudden move, but Poplar Fruit grabbed her hand. She couldn't help but push away her chair and get ready to leave. Stop. After waiting for a few months, Gushida saw that the duck in his mouth was about to fly away. How could he not be anxious? He roared. At this time, Wang Changyuan also stood in front of Poplar Fruit, not letting them leave. I don't care who you are. If you don't make things clear today, no one will leave. Gushida slammed the table. He was fat, and his palms were very fat. When he slammed the table hard, the cups, spoons, and chopsticks all jumped up and made a crisp collision sound. And you, Xiao Duan. Gushida pointed at Duan Shueching and said, Do you still want to work? Your work attitude not only makes Boss Wang very disappointed, but also makes me very, very disappointed. There are 2 more chapters today. I beg for monthly votes. I beg for recommendations. Everyone, use your votes to smash the poor. Greater than over equal to... Chapter 355. 9th update. I quit. Duan Shueching was held by Poplar Fruit. She suddenly turned her head and looked coldly at Gushida, who was threatening her with words. What did you say? Gushida's fat head suddenly froze. His finger pointing at Duan Shueching was still there. She said that she quit. With a leader like you, our family Shueching won't serve you anymore. Poplar Fruit shielded Duan Shueching behind him and said word by word, Did you hear that clearly? You're treating work as a game. Gushida was angry. His fingers trembled as he said angrily, It's better than you using work as an excuse to trick your female subordinates into bed, right? Poplar Fruit said disdainfully. Gushida was shocked, ashamed, and angry. He blurted out, You're slandering me. I'm slandering you? Poplar Fruit sneered and said, If I hadn't come early, Shueching would have been drugged by you. He patted Duan Shueching's hand, which was grabbing his arm nervously, and said, Fortunately, Shueching didn't drink that glass of wine. I think you've already drugged her, right? Duan Shueching's eyes suddenly widened. She turned to look at the glass of red wine and recalled how Gushida and the others had tried to trick her into drinking. She began to feel a little scared. What drug? Don't talk nonsense. Gushida pointed at Poplar Fruit and said in surprise, I'm talking nonsense. Poplar Fruit took out his mobile phone from his trouser pocket, turned on the audio he had just recorded, and turned the volume to the maximum. What do you know? The colder and more reserved this kind of woman is, the more annoying she is. When I get her, she'll be dead set. Gushida found that his voice came from Poplar Fruit's mobile phone. The iPhone's recording quality was very good, and every word could be heard clearly. Duan Shueching's cold face still didn't change, but her eyes seemed to spit out flames of anger as she stared at Gushida. Gushida's face turned red, but he couldn't find a reason to hide it because the 2 voices in the conversation were his and Wang Changyuan's. Poplar Fruit suddenly felt a gust of wind behind him. He quickly pushed Duan Shueching to the side and let Wang Changyuan, who was rushing from behind to snatch Poplar Fruit's mobile phone. Give me your mobile phone. Otherwise, both of you won't be able to walk out of this door. Wang Changyuan rolled up his sleeves and said fiercely to Poplar Fruit. Gushida also knew that if he let Poplar Fruit leave with this recording and let Poplar Fruit post it on the internet, with the power of the angry people on the internet, he would probably lose his reputation. Therefore, he didn't care about his image and came forward. He and Wang Changyuan formed a circle around Poplar Fruit and Duan Shueching. Because Poplar Fruit had just avoided them, he and Duan Shueching happened to be in the corner of the private room. Behind them was the wall, and there were 2 people in front of them. No matter how he looked at it, they couldn't escape. Gushida smiled treacherously and proudly. He picked up a chair from the table. Although it was dragged on the ground, he could swing it up at any time with his thigh-thick arms. I said, Why didn't you just do as I said? Why did you make it so awkward for everyone? Gushida's words were directed at Duan Shueching. He looked smug, as if he had already gained the upper hand. Duan Shueching's pretty face was pale. She pulled Poplar Fruit's arm, not knowing what to do. Since she was a child, she had been the apple of her family's eye. Not to mention fighting with others, she rarely even blushed. In such a situation, her mind went blank, and her usually calm expression became flustered. This flustered expression hit Gushida's G-spot. He liked to see women's expressions of fear, helplessness, and begging for mercy when they were forced by him. His face showed a perverted excitement. However, Poplar Fruit didn't look flustered at all. Looking at the two people who were gradually approaching, Poplar Fruit felt a little disdainful. Although there were two of them, and one of them had a weapon in his hand, Poplar Fruit could see that the two guys' footsteps were light, their bodies were fat, and their limbs were weak. They must have not exercised for years, and their bodies had been hollowed out by alcohol and women. Poplar Fruit was confident that he could take down 2 or 3 well-trained soldiers, excluding the special forces, of course, let alone these two ordinary people who had no strength at all. Now that his Taiji fist and Xingyi fist had reached great success, and his body movements were becoming more and more skilled, these two guys were not enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Looking back, Poplar Fruit smiled faintly at Duan Xueqing. He patted Duan Xueqing's trembling hands to comfort her. Then he pushed Duan Xueqing inside and turned to face the two men. Wang Changyuan felt that now was the best time to show his loyalty. He screamed and pounced on Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's primary target was Wang Changyuan. Wang Changyuan screamed fiercely, but he was not Poplar Fruit's match at all. Poplar Fruit just reached out and twisted his arms, spun him around, and then kicked his knees. Wang Changyuan couldn't help but fall to his knees. His two knees hit the floor with a bang, and he screamed in pain as he lay on the ground. "Ah!" Duan Xueqing screamed. She saw Gushida take advantage of Poplar Fruit's back, then swing the chair and smash it on Poplar Fruit's back. This guy was too treacherous, and the timing of his attack was very good. Poplar Fruit had just made Wang Changyuan kneel, and ordinary people really couldn't avoid his sneak attack. But Poplar Fruit was not an ordinary person. Without Duan Xueqing's reminder, Poplar Fruit noticed the movement behind him, and a sneer appeared on his face. Gushida didn't know how he moved, but Poplar Fruit suddenly dodged, revealing Wang Changyuan, who had fallen to the ground. At this time, it was too late for Gushida to stop. With the powerful inertia of the chair, it was impossible for him to stop it with his ability. Although Gushida had managed to slow down the chair a little, he could not control it at all. One of the chair's legs hit Wang Changyuan's raised buttocks. "Ah!" Wang Changyuan screamed again, covering his buttocks and rolling on the ground. Gushida was dumbfounded. He stood there in a daze, holding the chair. "Let's go." Poplar Fruit turned back and took Duan Xueqing's hand. He smiled at her, as if what had just happened was insignificant, and led her out of the door. As soon as they walked out of the door, the hostess ran up from the first floor with several men in white security uniforms, panting. As soon as she turned the stairs, she saw Poplar Fruit. She pointed at Poplar Fruit and shouted, "It's him!" At this time, Gushida also rushed out. He saw the hotel's security guard appear and shouted excitedly, "Catch him!" There's one more update today. Looking for monthly votes, looking for recommendations. Everyone, take your votes and throw them at the poor. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 356. 10th update. There will be no more updates in the morning. See you tomorrow at 7. Good night, everyone. As soon as they ran out, Poplar Fruit and Duan Xueqing met 4 hotel security guards. Under the lead of the hostess, they wanted to stop Poplar Fruit, who was disturbing their business. Gushida also ran out. When he saw the hotel security guards, it was as if he had seen his savior. He shouted excitedly, "Quick, catch him!" Obviously, Gushida was a regular customer of this restaurant. The owner of the restaurant knew that Gushida was not to be trifled with, so he privately instructed his men to be careful. The hostess realized that the handsome man who had suddenly gone crazy had actually provoked a big customer of their store. How could this be? No matter how handsome he was, money and power were not as useful at this time. The hostess was a little flustered. She was worried that Gushida would vent his anger on her. In order to make up for her mistake, she gritted her teeth and commanded, "Did you hear that? Help Mr. Gu catch him." The 4 security guards, who were quite tall, heard the command and rushed toward Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit pushed Duan Shiweching back and met them without fear. Don't think that the security guards are as powerful as they are described in novels. It's just a small restaurant. It's impossible to hire retired special forces as security guards. Among the 4 security guards, only one was a retired soldier. The others were all ordinary people. Even the retired soldiers had only learned a few military boxing moves in the army. When it came to fighting, they had forgotten all about it. They were no different from ordinary people. They rushed toward Poplar Fruit, trying to bully him with their numbers. They wanted to twist Poplar Fruit's arms from both sides. There were also some who came head-on to Poplar Fruit. The corridor was not spacious, and there was one person behind them. In the face of the siege, Poplar Fruit was not afraid at all. He met them head-on, but at the last moment of contact, he suddenly squatted down, put his left hand on the ground, and swung his right leg up. He swept his leg against the ground. She used the 8 steps meteor kicks, rolling waves kick technique. Although she wasn't very familiar with it, she relied on her strength to create miracles. Yang would knock down the 3 people running in front of her with one kick. The 4th security guard stopped in time and did not step on his companion. Poplar Fruit jumped over and appeared in front of him at lightning speed. The 4th security guard was shocked. He quickly covered his face and stepped back. Poplar Fruit grabbed one of his arms and pulled hard. Like a spring, the 4th security guard was pulled forward by Poplar Fruit. He staggered and fell on 2 of his companions. One of the security guards who fell was not hit. He struggled to get up, but Poplar Fruit turned around and kicked him in the butt. As a result, the 4 of them were stacked together like a human pyramid. They were not injured, but the heavy weight made them groan in pain. Everyone was dumbfounded. No one expected Poplar Fruit to be so fierce. For big men, even if they were not good, it was still 4 against 1. How could they be defeated by Poplar Fruit in less than half a minute? Poplar Fruit clapped his hands gently. He was not surprised by such a record and did not feel that there was anything to boast about. He now wanted to take Duan Shiweching and leave this place first. Ah! Duan Shiweching suddenly screamed. Hearing the sound, Poplar Fruit looked up and found that Gushida had run behind Duan Shiweching and clasped his fat arm around Duan Shiweching's neck. It was as if he had kidnapped a hostage. Gushida smiled proudly. He knew that with Duan Shiweching in his hands, Poplar Fruit would be cautious. In this way, Poplar Fruit would not be able to do anything to him. Don't come over. Your sister is in my hands. If you come over, I will kill her. Gushida chuckled. He bared his teeth and made a fierce expression. Coupled with his flattened face, he looked even uglier. Poplar Fruit heard this and slowed down his footsteps. However, he still walked forward slowly and did not show any emotion. Hee, you are very good, but what's the use of being good at fighting? This chick is now in my hands. In the end, won't she be controlled by a smart person like me? Gushida said proudly. You wait for me. When we get back to the police station, I will slowly deal with you. Poplar Fruit continued to move forward. Gushida suddenly buried his pig head in Duan Shiweching's long hair, sniffed it hard, and sighed. Tsk tisk, it's so fragrant. I have been thinking about you for months. You! Poplar Fruit glared and shouted angrily. At this time, Duan Shiweching also twisted violently. Don't worry, don't worry. Gushida laughed and said, Let me finish. As long as you obediently obey me tonight, I, Gushida, promise that I will let bygones be bygones. Gushida pretended to be generous and waved his hand. I will let your brother go. After that, he also wanted to touch Duan Shiweching's face with his fat palm. He had been looking forward to this moment for a long time. He wanted to wreak havoc on Duan Shiweching's indifferent but beautiful face. Gushida's eyes showed a trace of intoxication. Seeing that this disgusting guy was about to touch her, Duan Shiweching wriggled with a crying voice. She wanted to turn her head away and not let Gushida touch her, but her neck was clasped by Gushida's arm. How could she move? Seeing that Duan Shiweching was about to be touched, Poplar Fruit, who was approaching, also moved. Huh! Poplar Fruit suddenly jumped up and instantly jumped in front of Gushida. Gushida was shocked by Poplar Fruit. Before he could move, His rapidly enlarged pupils reflected Poplar Fruit's growing fist. That's right. Poplar Fruit rushed in front of Gushita and Duan Shueching, raised his fist, and threw a half-step blast punch. The punch landed squarely on Gushita's nose and eye. Poplar Fruit did not use a lot of strength, but for ordinary people, 10% or 20% of Poplar Fruit strength was already the same as that of an ordinary adult. With this punch, Gushita made a sound. His eyelids rolled, and he let go of Duan Shueching's arm. His whole body fell back. It was really a one-punch KO. If there was a commentator for the boxing championship on the scene, he might have already been unable to hold back and cheered. Poplar Fruit ignored the guy who had fainted after being beaten by him. He pulled Duan Shueching, who was still in shock and disgust, and comforted her. "It's okay. Don't worry. Let's go." After that, he pulled Duan Shueching and bypassed the 4 security guards who had not yet struggled out of the human pyramid. Passing by the greeter who was hiding in fear, Poplar Fruit did not even look at her. He went downstairs with Duan Shueching. Outside the restaurant, Poplar Fruit took Duan Shueching straight to his Land Rover, got in the car, and drove away. Tomorrow will still break out. There will be 6 updates. Looking for monthly votes, looking for recommendations. Everyone, use your votes to smash the poor. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 357. First update. After the car started for a while, Duan Shueching finally calmed down. She turned her head and looked at Poplar Fruit as she said, "Thank you." "Ha." Poplar Fruit laughed dryly and said, "What are you thanking me for? You are my sister. It's natural for me to help you." Poplar Fruit now understood that he couldn't continue to be confused about Duan Shueching's affairs. He had to make it clear. If he continued to be ambiguous, it would be unfair to Duan Shueching. It would also be unfair to Fong Bei, whom he was about to confess to. After Duan Shueching heard Poplar Fruit's words, she was silent for a while, then asked, "How did you know that although Duan Shueching had always been a woman of few words?" Poplar Fruit knew the meaning of her question. He smiled and said, "I came here today to look for a restaurant. I looked at several. When I came to this one, I saw you going upstairs. I thought you needed to do it for work. I didn't expect that I would accidentally overhear your conversation with Director Gu in the bathroom, so I quickly came to pull you out." Yang would continue to speak while driving. "I don't know," Duan Shueching said sadly. She didn't expect Gu Shida to be so pretentious. "By the way, who is he? What's his background?" Poplar Fruit asked. Today's matter would never end like this. With Gu Shida's character, even if Duan Shueching resigned, he wouldn't let it go so easily. Therefore, Poplar Fruit had to ask clearly before he could find a way to deal with this trouble. "His name is Gu Shida, a director of the sub-district office." Duan Shueching thought for a while and replied, "I don't know what his background is. It seems that he has relatives in the district. I don't know." It shouldn't be as simple as what Duan Shueching said. Poplar Fruit frowned slightly. He recalled Gu Shida's arrogant and domineering attitude. According to his previous conversation with Wang Chanyuan, Gu Shida had committed a lot of crimes in the past. If he could still jump around safely, there must be someone above him. After driving Duan Shueching to her community, Poplar Fruit said to Duan Shueching, "Don't worry. I'll take care of this. Go back and sleep. When you wake up, forget everything. Everything will be fine." Duan Shueching smiled at him and softly said, "Yes, I'm not afraid. But I'm going to lose my job." Duan Shueching covered her mouth and laughed. She was usually expressionless, but this time, she revealed a mischievous look. She said, "Brother, you have to take care of your sister in the future." Was she being kept? Poplar Fruit scratched his head and said, "Don't think that losing your job is a big deal. Isn't it just a civil servant? With your English level, you could be a translator in Shinda translation. Your income will definitely be higher than your job." The reason why Poplar Fruit didn't talk to Duan Shueching about interpreting was that Duan Shueching was not suited to be an interpreter. She was most suitable to be a translator at home quietly. "Okay." Duan Shueching nodded obediently. Woo-woo. Suddenly, there was a rush of sirens in the community, as if they were chasing after a fugitive. The sound of several police cars rushing could be heard from afar. Poplar Fruit's ears were more sensitive. He suddenly realized that the sound was getting closer and closer, as if it was coming for him. Quick, take my phone and get out of the car. Stay away. Poplar Fruit took out his phone and handed it to Duan Shueching. He hurriedly said, "If anything happens, quickly ask Mosquito for help." No. Poplar Fruit suddenly remembered that Song Juin's father might not be able to deal with the relative behind Gushida. He quickly told Duan Shueching, "If Mosquito can't handle it, find Big Brother his phone and ask him to get me out." "I'm not going." Duan Shueching was a little scared, but she didn't want to leave Poplar Fruit behind. "Are you stupid?" Poplar Fruit pushed her and said, "I'm the main target. They must catch me first. If you escape, then they can find someone to get me out. Go." Duan Shueching had just walked into the corridor when the police cars arrived and quickly surrounded Poplar Fruit's Land Rover. In order to buy time for Duan Shueching, Poplar Fruit got out his car with a smile and raised his hands. "Run. You run." Gushida's nostrils were stuffed with 2 balls of paper. He got out of a police car proudly and said in a muffled voice, "If you run to the ends of the earth, won't you still be caught by me?" At that time, in the restaurant, Gushida fainted and woke up. At that time, the police that the hostess had called before rushed over. Gushida looked at them and saw that they were acquaintances. They were the area policemen who often drank with them. "Damn, Brother Gu, how did you become like this?" The leading policeman rushed over to help him. Gushida was only a director, but his uncle was the leader of the area. He had great power, so of course, they had to curry favor with Gushida. Gushida wiped the blood dripping from his nose. He didn't care about stopping the bleeding and shouted, "Fuck, I was hit by a stick today. Otherwise, who would dare to touch me?" He was still stubborn. Who? Who dares to hit Brother Gu? I'll teach him a lesson." The leading policeman shouted. "Xiaohu, you came at the right time. Let's go after him and catch that kid for me." Gushida held his shoulder and said, "Tonight, I'll let him know what it means to live a life worse than death. Leave this to me. Brother Gu, you're still bleeding. Let's go to the hospital to have a look." Xiao struggled to support him and smiled flatteringly. No. Today I must watch you catch him," Gushida said, covering his nose. "Mr. Gu, the person who hit you drove away in a Land Rover. The license plate number is Guangdong AXXXX. The hotel manager who rushed over came over and said flatteringly. Xiaohu waved his hand and ordered, "Go after him." Gushida and the others left Wang Changyuan behind and chased in the direction where Poplar Fruit had left. There were surveillance cameras everywhere on the road. Poplar Fruit's car was so obvious. Xiaohu just asked the command center through the pager and dug out the route that Poplar Fruit had left. He honked all the way and chased after him unimpeded. Because of this, they caught up with Poplar Fruit not long after he went downstairs. Facing 3 police cars and 6 uniformed policemen surrounding him, Poplar Fruit smiled calmly and said, "Your nose is quite sharp, isn't it? It seems that my punch was too light." Gushida was so angry at Poplar Fruit that his nose was crooked. However, it might have already been crooked. He shouted, "You're still so stubborn when you're about to die. Let's catch him and see if he can still laugh." However, he still warned Xiaohu, "Be careful. This kid knows Kung Fu." Looking at the 6 policemen, who looked as if they were facing a formidable enemy, Poplar Fruit's expression was as usual. He smiled calmly, stretched out his hands, and said, "Catch him. There will be 6 updates today. Please vote and recommend. Everyone, take your votes and throw them at the poor. Greater than over equal to." Chapter 358. Second update. 2 stronger policemen suddenly rushed up from the side and twisted Poplar Fruit's hands behind his back. Poplar Fruit frowned. The 2 policemen's actions were too rough. He had already been arrested, but they still wanted to twist his hands. If it had been an ordinary person, his arms might have been dislocated. Poplar Fruit gently moved the muscles and bones of his arms and wrists to make himself more comfortable. These small movements were not noticed by them. Seeing that Poplar Fruit had been caught, Gushida breathed a sigh of relief. The police officer named Xiao who had deliberately flattered him, took out handcuffs from behind his waist. With a sinister smile, he went behind Poplar Fruit and clasped his hands. Xiao was not as tall as Poplar Fruit's shoulders. He had to poke his head out from behind Poplar Fruit and look at Gu Shida, waiting for his next instructions. Take him back. Take him back. Gu Shida waved his hand triumphantly. He and Xiao who got into the first car, while Poplar Fruit was pushed into the second police car by the two stronger policemen. Poplar Fruit followed them obediently, but he was still pushed hard by someone who pressed his head and almost hit the top edge of the car door. Poplar Fruit turned his head and glanced at the policeman who pushed him. The man had a pair of ugly triangular eyes and a high nose. He scolded, "What are you looking at?" Poplar Fruit turned his head and ignored him. He got into the back seat of the police car, and the man with the triangular eyes sat next to him and slammed the door. The police car came and went, and Poplar Fruit's Land Rover was driven away by a policeman. At this time, Duan Xueqing walked out of her hiding place in the corridor with tears in her eyes. She looked at the police car driving away and bit her lower lip with her pearly white teeth. She turned her head and ran back to her apartment. After closing the door, Duan Xueqing's hands trembled. She first called Song Jiwen according to Poplar Fruit's instructions. What? What happened? Song Jiwen shouted on the phone. Xueqing, don't cry. Tell me clearly. What happened to Lao Guo? He was taken away by the police, Duan Xueqing said, sobbing. What? Song Jiwen slammed the table, stood up, and asked. Fortunately, he already had his own office. Otherwise, he would have become the focus of everyone's attention. Who took him? Why was Lao Guo arrested? Song Jiwen asked in shock and disbelief. Duan Xueqing cut the long story short and said, because of me, sob sob. Song Jiwen couldn't understand the situation on the phone. He asked for Duan Xueqing's location and hung up the phone. He hurriedly told someone and ran out of the office. He called a taxi and rushed back to his apartment. Before Song Jiwen came back, Duan Xueqing took her phone and called her father. In her eyes, her father, who was worth hundreds of millions after decades of hard work, was her sky. He was the sky of the entire family. When she encountered such a big matter, the first thing she thought of was to ask her father for help. However, although Duan Xueqing's father was a little famous in the Jiangnan area, he only had the right to speak in their area. In Yangcheng, far away in Guangdong province, Duan Xueqing's father only had dealings with them during the Guangdong Trade Fair. His network didn't extend here at all. Not only did Duan Xueqing not find help from her family, but she also didn't speak in detail, which worried her mother a lot. This was a story for later. After putting down the phone, Duan Xueqing felt particularly helpless. Her usual indifference and calmness had turned into panicked tears. She could only hope that Song Jiwen would come back and give her good news. Song Jiwen came back. When he encountered a big matter, his ability to deal with it showed. He first asked Duan Xueqing, who spoke intermittently, the ins and outs of the matter. You mean Lao Guo hit Gu Shida because of you? Song Jiwen asked with a frown. Duan Xueqing nodded and said in a hoarse voice. He recorded the conversation on the phone. Song Jiwen took Poplar Fruit's phone and pressed the home button to light up the screen. At this time, the phone indicated that there was a missed call from Bei Bei. At this time, he didn't have the mood to care about the missed call. He directly swiped open the unlocked interface, found the audio that Duan Xueqing said, and listened to it. So that's what happened. Song Jiwen knew as soon as he heard it. Not to mention Poplar Fruit. If Song Jiwen encountered such a thing, he would definitely not be able to help but beat someone up. However, Poplar Fruit hit Gu Shida. If it were someone else, Song Jiwen would definitely ask his friends to get Poplar Fruit out, but Gu Shida was in trouble. Gu Shida alone was not a big deal, but his uncle, Gu Ziwei, was a deputy mayor. This official position was much more powerful than Song Jiwen's father's. A deputy mayor was equivalent to a deputy county magistrate, not to mention the deputy mayor of a provincial capital city like Yangcheng. Duan Xueqing saw Song Jiwen's frown and asked cautiously, "You can't do anything about it?" "I can't." Song Jiwen sighed. "His uncle is very powerful. Do you know where Lao Guo was arrested?" I'll see if there are any friends who can help talk to him and make him suffer less. Song Jiwon could only think of this way. Duan Shiueching shook her head. That's troublesome. Song Jiwon pulled his hair. His hair, which had been gelled, became messy. He wondered if he should ask someone about it. Brother Yang said that if you can't do anything, you can still look for Big Brother He. Duan Shiueching felt that she had caused a big trouble for Poplar Fruit. She was regretful and guilty, so she said in a low voice, Big Brother He? What Big Brother He? Song Jiwon's eyes lit up. He remembered that Poplar Fruit told him last time that he was plotted against in his hometown. In the end, he was still safe. As far as he knew, the person who plotted against Poplar Fruit was the same person who stopped him from dealing with Liang Zhenglin. But Poplar Fruit solved it. It meant that Poplar Fruit knew a very powerful person. This Big Brother, he might be the key to solving Poplar Fruit's current predicament. This was a misunderstanding. Song Jiwon confused Zheng Yujia with He Wenjua, but it didn't matter. He now found a new hope. After searching for a while on Poplar Fruit's mobile phone, Song Jiwon found a mobile phone number with Big Brother He written on it and quickly dialed it. Sorry, the number you dialed is turned off. There was a ruthless prompt from the phone. Song Jiwon felt like he had fallen into an ice cave. His right hand that was holding the phone froze. He Wenjua was probably on a mission again, but he was the last straw that Song Jiwon could grasp. How could this be? Song Jiwon put down the phone weakly. Why did he turn off his phone at the crucial moment? Looking at Duan Shiueching's face full of hope, Song Jiwon sighed and shook his head. Chapter 359. Third update. Back at the police station, Gu Shida watched with his own eyes as Yanghua was locked up in the small dark room of the interrogation room. He smiled contemptuously and chuckled in his heart. Overconfident, unruly citizen. He did not stay at the police station to wait for Poplar Fruit to be dealt with. He handed over the matters here to the loyal Xiao, and he proudly took the police car to the hospital to have his injuries examined. The examination was just a pretense. He wanted to find an acquaintance to write a serious injury examination report so that he could punish Poplar Fruit severely. Gu Shida felt humiliated when he was punched by Poplar Fruit, so he felt very satisfied that he had caught Poplar Fruit. For a moment, he forgot about Duan Shiueching, who had escaped, and the important audio on Poplar Fruit's phone. Duan Shiueching was fine. Even if a nun could escape, she could not escape the temple. Xiao Hu no, he should be called Superintendent Hu Chunxiang. There was a four-pointed star on his shoulder. After he sent Gu Shida away, he came back with his confidant, Ma Kai, and walked into the small dark room where Poplar Fruit was staying. This was a good opportunity to build a good relationship with the Gu family. Hu Chunxiang was just a small district police officer. At best, he was only a small captain with only a few people under him. If he could do things properly this time and satisfy Gu Shida, then Hu Chunxiang was likely to become Gu Shida's favorite. When Gu Shida and his uncle put in a good word for him, he would be promoted and become rich. That would not be a dream. Poplar Fruit was pinned to the iron table. The square iron table was directly welded to the ground, and there was no possibility of it moving. After being locked up, Poplar Fruit looked around the interrogation room. There was a thick soundproof wall beside him, and there was a camera in the corner of the room. Compared to the dark room when he first arrived, there was now a bright chandelier hanging high above the metal table, giving him a strong sense of oppression. Other than the table, there were only 3 wooden stools on the floor. Poplar Fruit sat on one, and there were 2 other stools across from him. Other than that, there was nothing else. There wasn't even a window. The entire room looked spacious yet sealed. Even though it was brightly lit, it still gave off a gloomy feeling. Hu Chunxiang and Ma Kai walked in with sinister smiles. Poplar Fruit saw the second person who walked in. It was the triangular-eyed guy who pushed him. The triangular-eyed man was tall and sturdy, but he had probably spent too much time drinking, so his bulging belly was not small. After closing the door, Hu Chunxiang was not in a hurry to make a move. He threw the notebook in his hand on the table and swaggered over to sit across from Poplar Fruit. The triangular-eyed Ma Kai sat next to him, pulled the notebook over, and prepared to record. Poplar Fruit sat still. Even though his hands were pinned to the table, he still sat with his back straight, without a trace of fear. "Tell me," Hu Chunxiang asked lazily. "Tell me what?" Poplar Fruit asked back with a smile that was not a smile. "Yo, you're still being stubborn?" Hu Chunxiang asked in a strange tone. "Okay, I'll play with you slowly. Name." Hu Chunxiang dragged his voice and asked, "Answer properly. Don't play tricks with me, or you'll suffer later." Poplar Fruit did not beat around the bush with these routine questions and directly answered, "Poplar Fruit." Ma Kai did not remember what Poplar Fruit said at all. Instead, he started to write on the paper. "Gender?" Hu Chunxiang asked. "Ah." Poplar Fruit shook his head and smiled softly. He was disdainful of such a stupid question. "Male." Hu Chunxiang asked a few more boring questions before asking, "Tell me, why did you maliciously injure people?" Poplar Fruit's eyes flashed with anger. Although he knew that these people had colluded with Gushida, he did not expect that he would be charged with such a crime without even knowing what had happened. "I didn't maliciously injure people." Poplar Fruit defended himself, even though he felt that it was useless to say it. "Why don't you ask what kind of illegal things Gushida did? How can you say that I maliciously injured people? The truth now is that Director Gu and you have never met, but you violently injured people in a restaurant. This is something that many restaurant employees can testify to." Hu Chunxiang tapped on the record book and let Ma Kai write it down. "Haha, you guys are really good at distorting the truth." Poplar Fruit was too lazy to argue with them. It was obviously Gu Shida who intended to drug his female subordinates. "I bumped into them, and you guys actually tried to confuse right and wrong. You didn't even figure out the facts before convicting me. Since you're here with me, it's not up to you to decide." Hu Chunxiang smiled. Poplar Fruit shook his head and sneered in his heart. "You guys are on your own." He looked up at the camera. Hu Chunxiang saw it. He turned his head and followed Poplar Fruit's eyes. When he turned back, he looked up and laughed. "Are you still looking forward to that thing? I'm not afraid to tell you that because of negligence, I forgot to turn on the camera in the interrogation room today. I'm sorry." Poplar Fruit's heart sank, but he still calmed down. He firmly believed that no matter what they said or did, he must not let go. When Big Brother, he came, none of them would be able to escape. Ma Kai's handwriting was sloppy, but he wrote quickly. In a short while, he finished writing the forged interrogation record. He looked at Hu Chunxiang. "Let him put his handprint." Hu Chunxiang waved his hand. It was not the first time they had done such dirty work. Ma Kai threw the notebook in front of Poplar Fruit. He took out a box of ink from his pocket and smiled ferociously. He walked around to Poplar Fruit's side. Poplar Fruit glanced at the notebook. As he had guessed, all the mistakes were written on him. Moreover, it was written that he had been persuaded to confess. It was really shameless. With such a confession, how could Yanguo allow them to imprint her fingerprints on it? He put his arms under the table and clenched his fists tightly. Even his thumbs were in his fists. Ma Kai squatted down and tried to break Poplar Fruit's fingers. However, Poplar Fruit's hands did not move at all. He could not even break a finger on Poplar Fruit's left hand. Eh. Ma Kai exerted all his strength, and his rough face turned red. He used all his strength, but it was to no avail. Poplar Fruit still had the energy to laugh. His laughter sounded like mockery to Ma Kai's ears. His hatred for Poplar Fruit deepened. Okay, let's do something to him." Hu Chunxiang was unhappy. He shouted, "If we don't teach him a lesson, he won't know that Lord Ma has 3 eyes." Ma Kai threw the ink on the table angrily. Then, he opened the door and went outside. He carried a book and a hammer as he walked in. Chapter 360. Fourth update. Looking at the thick book and the hammer in Ma Kai's hand, Poplar Fruit took a deep breath. "Do you know?" Hu Chunxiang waited for Ma Kai to close the door, then pretended to be kind and pretended to explain to Poplar Fruit. "We've tested it many times. Put a book on top of it and hit someone. From the outside, you can't see the scars at all. It's just that it's very painful." Hu Chunxiang exaggeratedly acted and pretended to be in pain. "When the hammer goes down, there will be a bang here. I guarantee that there will be internal injuries. If you hit the front, TSK, your ribs will be broken. But even the gods won't be able to find out how you got hurt. Poplar Fruit had seen movies before. Of course, he had seen this kind of torture. He pulled the handcuffs with both hands, but the handcuffs and the table did not move. He raised his head and glanced at Makai. He knew in his heart that he could not escape today. This was the second time Poplar Fruit had been to the police station. The first time was in the United States with Alan. At that time, he had been in the police station as a protected person. The treatment was completely different. They were as free as they were in their own home. Unexpectedly, the second time Poplar Fruit entered the police station of his own country for the first time, he encountered the worst torture. If you don't cooperate well, this will be the result. Hu Chuanxiang sighed hypocritically and said, I can't help it. Poplar Fruit smiled disdainfully in his heart. He knew that even if he obediently pressed his fingerprint, the two policemen who colluded with Gushida would not let him have an easy time. Makai went behind Poplar Fruit and slapped the book on Poplar Fruit's back. The time for revenge had come. Makai smiled ferociously. When his ugly face smiled, it gave people a creepy feeling. However, Poplar Fruit could not see it. Poplar Fruit did not struggle or twist. He did not dare to move recklessly. Now that he could not dodge, if he moved recklessly and caused Makai's hammer to miss, it would really be a tragedy. Now that there was a book as a cushion, it could at least increase the surface area of the impact. Of course, the force that penetrated through the book was still very impactful, but it was not as dangerous as being hit by a hammer directly. Taking a deep breath, the Poplar Fruit concentrated and activated the internal energy in his body. The thin stream around his body quickly gathered to his back and wrapped around his internal organs. Poplar Fruit wasn't sure if his body could withstand it, but he had to be fully prepared. It was very unusual for Poplar Fruit to not struggle or beg for mercy. However, Hu Chuanxiang and Ma Kai didn't care. They didn't care about Poplar Fruit. Anyway, they had to make Poplar Fruit suffer today. They only remembered Gu Shida's exhortation to make Poplar Fruit suffer a fate worse than death. Makai swung his hammer. He was afraid that he did not control the direction well. If it hit Poplar Fruit's head and killed him, the two of them would not be able to escape. However, he used all his strength when he smashed down. Hu Chuanxiang's order and his own personal grievances made him want to smash Poplar Fruit's head until he vomited blood. Gritting his teeth, the Poplar Fruit took Makai's hammer. Through the book, the Poplar Fruit could feel a strong force. If it weren't for the sponge-like internal energy wrapping around his internal organs, the power of Makai's hammer would have caused serious internal injuries to Poplar Fruit. Even so, the Poplar Fruit still felt his internal organs shake violently. His chest felt stuffy, and he almost lost his breath. Fortunately, the Poplar Fruit's internal energy was Tai Chi then. He spat out a mouthful of turbid chi. Most of the force he received was removed by him, and the rest did not cause any harm. However, the Poplar Fruit still groaned and pretended to be in pain. Although he wasn't injured, he didn't feel good being hammered by his beanstalk head after head. Hit him! Hu Chuanxiang was not satisfied with the effect, so he commanded. Makai smashed 2 more times. The Poplar Fruit still groaned twice, but he didn't feel like he couldn't withstand it all. In the last 2 hits, the Poplar Fruit mastered the technique of unloading the force. His internal energy was like a strong, elastic cotton, spreading out the force of the hammer. Then, as his body muscles trembled, the force was removed layer by layer. Hu Chuanxiang scolded, Makai, did you not fucking eat today? Move, I'll do it. After taking Makai's hammer, Hu Chuanxiang pressed one hand on the book and swung the hammer down with the other. Hu Chuanxiang thought too highly of himself. His strength wasn't even as great as Makai's. If he smashed down like this, he wouldn't be able to put any pressure on Yanghua. This little bit of strength was no different from scratching an itch for him. The Poplar Fruit concentrated and entered that mysterious state again. It was as if he had an extra pair of eyes at the back of his head, and he clearly saw Hu Chuanxiang's movements. Hand, book, hammer. The Poplar Fruit measured the positions of the 3 in his heart, and he had a plan. Just as Hu Chuanxiang's hammer fell, the poplar fruit suddenly twisted his back, and Hu Chuanxiang's hand that was holding the thick book couldn't help but shift. There was only a bang and the sound of the hammer touching flesh. Ow! Hu Chuanxiang howled loudly. The hammer and book in his hand were all thrown to the ground. He was like a dog whose tail had been stepped on, and he jumped up with his left hand between his legs. The moment the poplar fruit moved, Hu Chuanxiang's hammer hit the back of his hand. Although he held back his strength, and the angle was not right, this still made Hu Chuanxiang suffer. This kind of pain was as if his left hand was broken. It was a heart-wrenching pain. "Boss, how are you?" Ma Kai rushed up and asked about his boss's injury. "This." Hu Chuanxiang sucked in cold air. How could he speak? He jumped on the spot for a long time before the intense pain subsided. "Motherfucker, you fucking tricked me." Hu Chuanxiang looked at his left hand. The back of his hand was swollen. He gritted his teeth and angrily rushed over to kick the poplar fruit's chair. Poplar fruit could not escape this time. After all, he was still handcuffed to the iron table. His whole body fell to the ground because of the fall of the chair. Fortunately, poplar fruit used his palm to grab the chain of the handcuffs. His wrist was not bound by the handcuffs. "Boss, do you want to go to the hospital?" Ma Kai dutifully played the role of a henchman. He pulled Hu Chuanxiang's left hand to check and worriedly asked, "I don't know if there is a bone injury." However, Hu Chuanxiang, who failed to beat someone but was injured, could not swallow this anger. His mind was full of thoughts of killing poplar fruit. Gritting his teeth, Hu Chuanxiang pushed Ma Kai away and kicked poplar fruit's body twice. Poplar fruit held his head and used his internal energy to protect his body. He did not make a sound. Hu Chuanxiang was not satisfied. He shouted, "Motherfucker, this kid is a tough bone. Ma Kai, give him something to eat. Everyone, use your votes to hit the poor. Greater than over equal to." Chapter 361. Fifth update. Poplar fruit did not cry out in pain, nor did he beg for mercy under the torture. What was even more unexpected was that he actually resisted, causing Hu Chuanxiang to hit his own hand. Not only did Hu Chuanxiang not feel any sense of accomplishment, but he was also mad at poplar fruit. He shouted, "Beat him to death with the stun baton." "Boss," Ma Kai reminded him with some concern, "the stun baton is too obvious." "What are you afraid of? As long as we don't kill him, Gu Shida will take responsibility for us." Hu Chuanxiang glared at Ma Kai with red eyes. Since his boss had said so, Ma Kai quickly turned around and left. Poplar fruit gritted his teeth and looked up at Hu Chuanxiang with hatred. This policeman's heart was completely black, and he didn't want him to have an easy time. He had used all kinds of methods, and he had been beaten and kicked, but he still wasn't willing to give up. However, poplar fruit did not dare to resist. In fact, even if his hands were held, with his strength, poplar fruit could still make the two black-hearted policemen kneel down. But what good would it do him to beat them here? If he hurt them, poplar fruit would be attacking the police, and they would have every reason to shoot him. If they took out their guns and shot him to death, poplar fruit would really die of injustice. Poplar fruit did not regret letting Hu Chuanxiang hit his own hand, because Hu Chuanxiang could only swallow his anger. Poplar fruit could say that it was an accident. Yes, an accident. Poplar fruit's head, which had been heated by anger, calmed down a little. He glanced at the situation in the room and quietly had an idea. The door of the interrogation room was open again, and Ma Kai walked in with a police stun baton. Because of the hot weather, poplar fruit was sweating profusely again. When he came back this time, the black skin on his upper body had been taken off, leaving only a yellow undershirt. His black chest hair was exposed from the undershirt, and it was ugly and disgusting. "Boss." Ma Kai walked over and handed the stun baton to Hu Chuanxiang. "Come and fight." Hu Chuanxiang scolded impatiently. "Are you a fucking pig? My hand is already like this, and you still want to give it to me? Cuff him to the back," Hu Chuanxiang commanded. "Yes, yes." Ma Kai hurriedly nodded and bowed. Ma Kai walked to poplar fruit's side and took out a key to unlock the handcuffs on one of poplar fruit's hands. He was not worried about what would happen to poplar fruit, because poplar fruit had always shown that he was willing to be beaten and scolded. Moreover, there were two people here. Ma Kai firmly believed that if Poplar Fruit resisted, he would definitely be courting death. Poplar Fruit did not resist. He allowed Ma Kai to twist his arm behind his back and drag him up from the ground. Poplar Fruit was pushed and dragged by Ma Kai. Without them noticing, his right leg seemed to have accidentally kicked a wooden stool, and the wooden stool that had fallen to the ground was kicked to another position. Ma Kai dragged Poplar Fruit and handcuffed Poplar Fruit to the crossbar on the back wall. After coming in, Poplar Fruit did not understand why there was a crossbar installed on the innermost wall. It was similar to the one used in hotel bathrooms to hang towels. Now he finally understood. It was used to handcuff people. He did not forget to kick Poplar Fruit on the ground. Hu Chuanxiang seemed to have vented his anger and turned back to his original position. Poplar Fruit pretended to groan. He raised his eyelids and looked at Hu Chuanxiang's position. In his mind, he made a new calculation and adjustment. These two people seemed to have a perverted tendency to abuse people for fun. Ma Kai turned back to the table and picked up the police stun baton. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Their eyes flashed with ferocious pleasure. As for Ma Kai, he turned to look at Poplar Fruit. He walked over with the police stun baton in his left hand. His mouth curved into a creepy smile. Crackle. Ma Kai pressed the switch on the police stun baton. The tip of the stun baton flashed with a charming blue light. The effect of the electric current made a terrifying sound. Poplar Fruit's eyes could not calm down. He thought he was just being whipped. He did not expect them to want to use the stun baton to electrocute him. Although he had never touched electricity, Poplar Fruit knew it was not to be trifled with. So what if he had internal energy? Poplar Fruit did not think he could withstand an electric shock. Seeing that Poplar Fruit's eyes finally panicked, Ma Kai and Hu Chuanxiang raised their heads and laughed loudly. Fierce! I told you to be fierce. Hu Chuanxiang's mouth was merciless as he proudly shouted. No matter what, this time it seemed like he could not avoid it. Poplar Fruit's heart miserably shouted, Big brother he, where are you? Why aren't you here yet? He could only clench his teeth and endure. Poplar Fruit clenched his teeth again. However, Ma Kai did not act like this. He held the police baton in his right hand and used his left hand to lift up Poplar Fruit's shirt. He pulled it up and put it on Poplar Fruit's head. This time, Poplar Fruit was really stunned. No, I have to calm down. Hoo-hoo. Poplar Fruit forced himself to calm down and gasped for breath. Although he could not see with his eyes, Poplar Fruit still had the ability to sense. Calming his heart, Yanghua circulated his internal energy, allowing himself to once again enter that mysterious realm and successfully see the scene of the outside world. Just as he was able to see, Poplar Fruit saw Ma Kai press the switch of the police baton. The top of the baton flashed with a blue electric light, and it was going straight for his stomach. At that moment, Poplar Fruit completed two actions. One was to remember Ma Kai and Hu Chuanxiang's latest position, and the other was to quickly transfer his internal energy to the point where the baton would land. However, just as he had guessed, internal energy could not resist the electric shock. The blue electric light acted on his skin and instantly penetrated his skin. His internal energy was like a piece of tissue paper in front of the electric shock. It only took a few tenths of a second for the feeling of numbness to spread throughout his whole body. However, when Poplar Fruit faced the electric shock, it was not that he did not have any resistance. After the internal energy cleansing, his body had a very strong resistance. The pain of the electric shock only made Poplar Fruit's body tremble violently. It was not like an ordinary person who instantly lost control and foamed at the mouth. At that moment, Poplar Fruit was forced out of that mysterious realm, but Poplar Fruit still desperately tried to regain control of his body. The process seemed very long, but in reality, it happened in a flash. It was so fast that Ma Kai was still holding the police baton and standing in the same place. It was so fast that Hu Chuanxiang was still laughing with his mouth wide open. According to his memory and plan, Poplar Fruit twisted his body greatly. It seemed that he had inadvertently used his shoulder to hit Ma Kai's arm. Poplar Fruit's angle was very tricky. It happened to hit Ma Kai with a 90-degree turn, but he himself was paralyzed on the ground as if he had been electrocuted. Poplar Fruit pretended to fall to the ground. His legs kicked and hooked as if it was the after effect of being electrocuted. His muscles twitched, and he hooked Ma Kai's leg. Ma Kai lost his center of gravity and fell down with bared fangs and brandished claws. In front of him, Hu Chunxiang was coincidentally. Chapter 362. Sixth update. Yanghua lightly hooked the hook according to the route in her memory. Ma Kai lost his balance and pounced on Hu Chunxiang with bared fangs and brandished claws. Although he controlled the police stun baton in his hand at the last moment and did not hit Hu Chunxiang's head, his body still hit Hu Chunxiang. The two of them were not far away. Hu Chunxiang covered his injured hand and wanted to get closer to see Poplar Fruit's sorry state. This situation happened so suddenly that he did not have time to hug Ma Kai and did not use his hands to control his body's balance. As a result, his whole body was hit by Ma Kai, who was as thick as a bull. Unable to stand firm, Hu Chunxiang fell to the side, but the moment he fell to the ground, his pupils instantly widened. A wooden stool appeared in his sight. That's right, it was the wooden stool. Hu Chunxiang fell on it. Although his hands reflexively supported himself on the ground, it was inevitable that he fell heavily on the stool. The point of impact happened to be Hu Chunxiang's mouth that did not have time to close. Clack! There was a sound of something breaking. Hu Chunxiang's four front teeth were tragically broken by the leg of the wooden stool in this accident. Poplar Fruit's angle and strength were just right. Of course, he did not expect that after being electrocuted, he could still perfectly execute his plan according to the trajectory in his memory. He was covered and fell from the electric shock. No one would think that everything that happened just now was deliberately done by Poplar Fruit. Even that stool, they did not know that Poplar Fruit did something to it. It was as if it was just kicked down by Hu Chunxiang. Everything seemed to be a coincidence. It was all just an accident. Boss! Boss! Ma Kai looked back at Poplar Fruit, who seemed to have been electrocuted on the ground. He hurriedly crawled to Hu Chunxiang on all fours. It seemed like he was in big trouble. He was accidentally tripped by Poplar Fruit, who fell down and even caused his boss to fall. Dead, dead. Boss will definitely scold me to death. Ma Kai cried and carefully turned over the unconscious Hu Chunxiang on the stool. Ma Kai exclaimed. Hu Chunxiang's eyes were rolled back, and his mouth was badly mutilated. He looked very scary. He was not afraid of blood. In the past, when he beat criminals, they were covered in wounds and looked worse than Hu Chunxiang's current appearance. But the one who was injured was Hu Chunxiang, his boss. Ma Kai panicked. He called out to Hu Chunxiang and pinched his philtrum. The only thing missing was mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Boss, wake up! Ma Kai cried out, it's all my fault. I'm so stupid. Please don't let anything happen to you. Yanghua pretended to be electrocuted and lay on the ground. From time to time, her legs would twitch as if the spasms from the electric shock had not disappeared. But in reality, it was him laughing. Through the top, covering his head, Poplar Fruit used his internal energy to see everything in the outside world. Everything was going according to the script he had written. It was just that Ma Kai, that rough and burly man, was hugging Hu Chunxiang with a face full of resentment, misfortune, and worry. It was a little funny. Yanghua tried hard not to laugh out loud, but his stomach was cramping from trying to hold back his laughter. He could only shake his body slightly. Poplar Fruit was not completely immersed in the complacency of his plan succeeding. He was still worried because, although Hu Chunxiang fell on the stool as he had planned, he could not control the angle and strength of Hu Chunxiang hitting the stool. If Hu Chunxiang really hit that vital part, it could be a life. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit did not have to worry for too long. Hu Chunxiang slowly woke up. Cough, cough. Just as Hu Chunxiang opened his eyes, he coughed violently. His bloody lips finally spat out the broken tooth stuck in his throat. The broken tooth with a blurry bloody foam sprayed onto Ma Kai's face. Ma Kai felt disgusted, but he did not dare to leave Hu Chunxiang to wipe his face. He could only smile foolishly and say, Boss, you're awake? Hu Chuanxiang took a long time to recover. He raised his trembling right hand and touched his mouth. With a sobbing tone, he asked, "Where's the lotus root? Oh, tooth." With all his front teeth broken, Hu Chuanxiang's words were not clear. "Pa!" Ma Kai slapped himself hard and begged in a low voice, "Boss, I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I caused you to fall. Where's my teeth?" Hu Chuanxiang's hands grabbed Ma Kai's sweatshirt, shook it hard, and asked with tears in his eyes. The interrogating officer was already in this state, so the interrogation could not continue. Hu Chuanxiang was sent to the hospital by Ma Kai in a daze. He now had contusions on his hands, a few broken teeth, and a broken lip. He needed to go to the hospital quickly for treatment. However, Ma Kai did not let go of poplar fruit. In his heart, he still regarded poplar fruit as the main culprit. If it were not for poplar fruit, how could he have failed and caused his boss to be so miserable? Before leaving, Ma Kai told the other policemen in the police station, "Put him in the 8th prison." 8th prison? The younger policeman opened his mouth wide in surprise. "Just do as I tell you to. Why are you talking nonsense?" Ma Kai impatiently threw down a sentence and drove Hu Chuanxiang straight to the hospital. Why was the young policeman so surprised? What kind of place was the 8th prison? We all know that there is a difference between prison, detention center, and detention center. Not everyone who is caught will be put in prison. Prison is generally used to hold criminals who have been convicted and sentenced by the court, and the criminals who enter prison will have to serve a long sentence before they are released. Detention center is very similar to prison, but there is a fundamental difference. Generally, it is used to hold criminals who have violated the law of public security. The detention time is very short, and most of them leave after 10 days. For example, poplar fruit has not been completely convicted, so he's called a suspect, although we know that poplar fruit is not guilty. He cannot be put in prison or detention center. Suspects who have not been convicted and whose trial has not been completed will be put in detention center. However, there are exceptions. Some of the sentences are lighter. For example, some criminals who have less than a year in prison will also stay in detention center. Cell number 8 was a cell marked with the character 8 in this district's detention center. It didn't hold short-term petty criminals, but suspects who were suspected of major crimes. Some of them look gentle, but in fact, they are extremely vicious. Some criminals have even committed heinous crimes and are temporarily detained here, waiting for the judicial process to be completed before they are sent to prison. The prison guards in this area will usually throw these big bad criminals together to make it easier to manage them. This will prevent them from being assigned to different cells, which will make the entire detention center jittery and uneasy. Tomorrow will still be breaking out. There will be 6 updates. Looking for monthly votes, looking for recommendations. Everyone, use your votes to support the poor. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 363. First update. Let's go. Opening the iron gate of the detention center and entering the prison area, the young policeman looked back at poplar fruit and said softly. He turned around and led poplar fruit inside. The moment he turned around, he sighed softly and shook his head slightly. From the looks of poplar fruit, he was younger than him, and his gentle appearance made people feel that he was still a child studying in school. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that he was easy to bully, especially in the complex environment of the detention center. The young policeman didn't understand why Ma Kai asked him to put poplar fruit in the 8th cell full of vicious criminals. He could imagine what would happen to poplar fruit with messy hair and a haggard and weak appearance. Like a sheep in a pack of tigers, it was very likely that he would be torn to pieces in less than a moment. What the young policeman knew was that poplar fruit, this poor guy, must have provoked Ma Kai. Otherwise, why would Ma Kai use such cruel means to deal with him? The young policeman had just worked for less than 2 years. There were a lot of things he couldn't see through, or it could be said that his heart wasn't completely black. He still had a trace of pity in his heart. But in front of Hu Chuanxiang and Ma Kai, these 2 old people who were higher than him, he didn't have the ability to interrupt. He could only obey. Here comes another one. The corridor was very long, and the 8th cell was at the innermost end on the left. Poplar Fruit had to pass by several cells. Seeing that there was a newcomer, the people in the cells all leaned on the air vent above the iron gate and whistled at Poplar Fruit. "Yo, what a handsome guy." There was also this kind of weird and indecent voice. There was also someone who agreed. "TSK, TSK, such tender skin. How many years has it been since I've seen such a good thing? You motherfucker, don't fight with me." The first guy scolded, "Pretty boy, come to Big Brother's number 5. Big Brother guarantees that no one will dare to bully you, as long as you wash your ass obediently. Ha ha." As he spoke, he continued to thrust his crotch forward as if he had not had enough. It was extremely disgusting. This reminded Yonghua of the teabag in the American drama Prison Break. However, Robert Kane was different. Kniep's teabag was much more perverted than him. He was an evil character that made people feel extremely uncomfortable. Yonghua didn't pay any attention to him. He walked forward expressionlessly. "Sigh, how boring. Such a good little fresh meat flew away when it was in my mouth." The pervert from the 5th prison said in boredom as he placed his arm on the bars of the metal gate. "Yeah, this kid is going to the 8th prison." When someone saw that Poplar Fruit didn't stop after arriving at the 7th prison, he shouted as if he had discovered a new continent. What? There's a new person in the 8th prison? This news immediately caused a commotion on the left side of the detention center. Every prison guard stood up and pushed aside the people blocking the door to look out through the bars. What's all the commotion about? A prison guard impatiently took out his baton and knocked on the metal gate twice. He scolded, "If you don't want to suffer, behave yourself." The young police officer walked to the door of the 8th prison, turned around, and looked at Poplar Fruit with a complicated expression before gesturing to the prison guard beside him to open the door. The door to the 8th prison was pulled open. It was quiet inside. Perhaps because it was the innermost prison, the lighting was dim, like a black hole that could devour people. "Go in." The young police officer gently pushed Poplar Fruit's shoulder. Poplar Fruit wasn't afraid. He stopped moving his chest and walked in. Just as he brushed past the young police officer, Poplar Fruit heard the young police officer say to him in an almost inaudible voice, "Be careful." Poplar Fruit turned his eyes in surprise and looked at the young police officer. He smiled slightly and walked in with his head held high. Back at Poplar Fruit's teacher's apartment near the school, Fong Beibei had just made a bottle of warm water for Kiki to drink. Although Fong Beibei had to revise today and didn't have time to play with Kiki, Kiki could still have fun by herself. Fong Beibei remembered Poplar Fruit's instructions and gave Kiki more water. It was already afternoon. Fong Beibei called Poplar Fruit twice. The first time was in the afternoon, but no one picked up. The first time she called, it was mentioned in the previous chapter that Duan Shueching was calling her family and didn't pay attention. Song Jiwen didn't have time to check the missed calls, so he forgot about it later. The second time she called, Poplar Fruit's phone was turned off. Fong Beibei's heart felt a little stifled. There was an indescribable feeling of discomfort. Now, she couldn't even focus on her revision. She was still holding the book in her hand, but her eyes were staring blankly at Kiki's figure. It was as if she had lost her usual spirit. Kiki felt Fong Beibei's gaze. She grabbed the milk bottle with both hands and sucked hard on the warm water inside. She suddenly turned her head and met Fong Beibei's eyes. She didn't make a sound. She turned her head and swayed her body as she walked forward. Every step she took was on the seams of the living room's tiles. It seemed to be very interesting. After taking 2 steps, Kiki suddenly turned her head back and met Fong Beibei's eyes again. Hee. Kiki bit the milk bottle and laughed foolishly. She seemed to be proud of herself for winning a game with Beibei's sister. A cough. Kiki obviously forgot that she was still drinking water. Her laughter made her choke, and she started coughing violently. At this time, Fong Beibei's unfocused eyes finally regained focus. She hurriedly threw the book in her hand to the side and walked over to Chi-Chi's side in 3 steps. She hugged her and gently patted her chest. "Be careful when you drink water." Fong Beibei took the milk bottle from Kiki's hand and put it on the table next to her. She continued to massage Kiki's smooth and tender chest. Are you feeling better? Chi-Chi coughed twice softly before nodding her head. Fong Bebe looked at Kiki. She couldn't help but raise her eyeballs. She hesitated for a moment and asked, Kiki, did Papa go to see Annie today? Kiki thought for a moment and shook her head with certainty. She said in a childish voice, Auntie went home. Papa said she was in the capital. Sister Bebe, what is the capital? The capital is a city far, far away from us. Fong Bebe's mood relaxed a little. However, she still asked Kiki another question. Kiki, what has your papa been doing recently? I won't tell you. Kiki naughtily covered her mouth and laughed. Papa said to keep a secret. Then secretly tell Sister Bebe. Fong Bebe tempted Kiki and said, I won't tell your papa. In the end, the love for Sister Bebe prevailed. Kiki hesitated for a moment and put her arms around Fong Bebe's neck. She put her mouth next to her ear and whispered, Papa is going to give Sister Bebe a big surprise. And Kiki knows a big cake. Fong Bebe was confused by Kiki. Her birthday wasn't in a few months. How could there be a big cake as a surprise? This was actually just Kiki's imagination. In her little mind, the happiest thing was to eat a cake on her birthday. All right, I forgot to thank Book Friend Prince for his reward the day before yesterday. Recently, the Book Friends rewards have been really good. Brother Lixia, XXOO. Zeta is not good. There are still many book friends. Xiaohan doesn't have time to list them one by one. Xiaohan thanks everyone here. Today is still the 6th chapter. Looking for monthly votes. Looking for recommendations. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 364. Second update. Regardless of whether Kiki misled Fong Bebe or made Fong Bebe even more confused, Fong Bebe's mood improved a lot after being stood up by Poplar Fruit. She could finally concentrate on reading her book. As for Poplar Fruit, he walked into the 8th prison that made many people's expressions change. The metal door behind him creaked and closed again. After the metal door closed, the light in the 8th prison grew dimmer. It was still daytime, so the detention center didn't turn on the lights. Poplar Fruit stood in place for a while to adjust himself. Only then did he see the situation in the 8th prison through the high window in the afternoon sunlight. In the 8th prison, there were 6 people other than himself. At this time, they were all sitting on their respective beds and looking at him coldly. The top bunk near the door was the one with the best air and hygiene conditions. There was a tall and burly man sitting on it. Poplar Fruit felt that this guy should be about 195 meters tall. His muscles were very strong, and he was much taller than himself. His thick thighs were resting on the edge of the bed and shaking gently. It was a hair-raising sight. One couldn't help but worry that he would shake the bunk bed until it fell apart. The bed closest to the inside was piled with some junk. There was also a thin and weak man sitting on the bottom of the bed. This made Poplar Fruit a little confused. There were a total of 4 bunk beds in the 8th prison. There were 2 bunk beds in each row. There were a total of 8 beds. Even if there were 6 people, there was still an empty bed that was better than this one, because this bed just happened to be facing the simple toilet that was used for prisoners to relieve themselves. Regardless of whether it was washed clean or not, the smell was unbearable. However, that thin and weak man didn't want to stay on a bed that was slightly better. He just had to stay there. Papa. The prison guard's footsteps at the door gradually faded away. Poplar Fruit was thinking about where he should sit. He Wenjua and Big Brother, he wouldn't be able to save him anytime soon. Poplar Fruit could only take one step at a time. Poplar Fruit suddenly realized that as soon as the prison guard left, the thin man in the innermost bed jumped down from the bed with 2 other men and slowly walked towards Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit looked at them warily and stayed where he was without moving. Haha, it's really a gigolo. No wonder the 5th demon was so excited. A slightly stronger man walking in front laughed, but he was very disdainful. In the eyes of the people in the 8th prison, the people in the other prisons were too weak. No one dared to compare themselves to the people in the 8th prison. The thin and weak man stood behind the 2 men and looked at Poplar Fruit through the gap between them. He felt that Poplar Fruit seemed to be just a naive student. No matter how he looked at it, he was the type that was easy to bully. He suddenly straightened his back. "Boy, tell me, what did you do to get in here?" The thin and weak man asked casually. Anyone who knew him could see that he was putting on an act. He was just being careful, but now his tone was so big. "Fuck." The slightly stronger man turned around and gave him a slap. This slap was very loud. "Chong X Liang, I'm standing here. Do you have the right to speak?" Brother Feng, I was wrong." This little one also wanted to save Brother Feng some energy. Chong X Liang was still smiling after being slapped. He nodded and bowed as he apologized. Chong X Liang, he should have committed the crime of rape. Poplar Fruit finally had some understanding in his heart. On the one hand, he was thin and weak and easy to bully. He couldn't beat these prison bullies. On the other hand, the crime he committed made everyone despise and even hate him. Therefore, he was pushed to the worst position. Don't think that all criminals will be treated equally. They are also divided into 3, 6, and 9 classes. For example, rapists are the most inferior and most looked down upon. This place is, after all, a world where the strong are respected. The more powerful a person is, the more they will be respected. Rapists, what kind of strong person are they if they lay their hands on women? In prison, they're like rats crossing the street. Everyone wants to beat them up, especially Chong X Liang. He used to be a teacher. In the end, he raped a 5th grade primary school student. This matter was exposed in the detention center. Everyone who saw it disliked him. He was also thrown into the 8th prison to let those evil people teach him a lesson. Now, his treatment is still very poor. "I didn't commit a crime," Poplar Fruit calmly replied. "Ha!" The entire number 8 district burst into laughter. Even the sturdiest man laughed in a low, muffled voice. Chong X Liang also seemed to have heard some funny joke. He squatted on the ground and slapped the floor. He laughed until tears came out. The sturdiest man, called Brother Feng, paused for a moment and then said, "A lot of people who come here say this, but they still obediently confess in the end." "Okay, don't dawdle with me. What crime did you commit? Hurry up and say it. Are you afraid that we will leak the secret? We are not the police, who will care about your trivial matters." "I didn't commit a crime." Poplar Fruit ignored their ridicule. Word by word, he seriously said, "Motherfucker, you are quite unreasonable. You came to the 8th prison, and you are still so dishonest?" Brother Feng's face suddenly changed. "Brother Feng, since he is so disobedient, let him fish for the goldfish." Chong X Liang's face was full of flattery. He came up to Brother Feng and offered a plan. After Chong X entered the 8th prison, he had been tortured. Today, when he saw that there was someone weaker than him, he was happy. He even hoped that the newcomer would be tortured more severely than him. Only then would he feel happy. Moreover, if Yang's status was lower than his, then he would be able to get rid of the dark days of being ordered around by others and be spurned by others. He would be able to live a life of being ordered around. "Fish your mother." Brother Feng's temper was fickle. He gave Chong X Liang a loud slap. The 2 slaps were on the same side of the face. The obviously swollen face became very asymmetrical. Reminder, the next part is a bit heavy. If you don't want to read it, you can directly skip it. I don't want to hear your voice. Don't disgust me. Brother Feng kicked Chong X Liang to the side. "See, this is the result of disobedience." Brother Feng pointed at the tip of Poplar Fruit's nose and shouted proudly, "Do you know what goldfish is?" Brother Feng patted the shoulder of the person next to him and said, "Cowboy, explain to him. Don't think that we are scaring him." Goldfish was actually a slang in the prison. It was one of the tricks used to torture the newcomer. It meant that the prisoner would throw the big fish, a less direct word, into a bucket or basin, and then pour some water into it. The tortured person would go up and fish it out. After fishing it out, he would let out a sigh. "Ah, the goldfish are fished out." Today is still the 6th update. Looking for monthly votes, looking for recommendations. Greater than over equal to. Chapter 365. 3rd update. No need. Poplar Fruit waved his hand. "I'm not interested in listening." No matter what the goldfish fishing referred to, Poplar Fruit had no interest in understanding. He was annoyed. When he came out, Poplar Fruit told Fong Bei Bei that he was just going to see the tutor and would be back at noon. As a result, he encountered such an incident. Not only was he arrested, but he was also imprisoned. He couldn't get out for a while. He didn't know if Fong Bei Bei would be worried. His daughter was fine. With Fong Bei Bei taking care of her, there shouldn't be a problem. Duan Xueqing should be fine. He was arrested for so long, but he didn't see the police bring anyone back. She should have escaped. But why hadn't they followed her instructions and found he daged to save her? Poplar Fruit was in a panic. He didn't consider that his big brother, he often couldn't get through to him. However, Poplar Fruit's impatience made Brother Fong feel embarrassed. Although he wasn't the leader of the 8th prison, he was at least ranked 4th among the 6 people because of his aggressive and fierce character and the crime of flying car robbery. If it was another prison, he might be the leader. Cowboy, teach him a lesson. Brother Fong was furious and pushed the young man named Cowboy. In the 8th prison, other than the useless Chong X Leong, he could only command Cowboy. The other 3 had taken lives in their hands, so he did not dare to be unreasonable with the outlaws. Cowboy was young, but he had been in society for many years. He often wandered on the bus with his companions to steal. He was a bully. He walked up and found that he wasn't as tall as Poplar Fruit. He was a little unhappy and shouted, "In front of Brother Fong and the other big brothers, why don't you kneel down?" He jumped up and wanted to slap Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit was quick and grabbed his wrist. As a result, he jumped so high, but he fell awkwardly and almost lost his balance. Cowboy's face darkened. He felt that he had lost a lot of face. He scolded, "Aya, you dare to resist? Let go." However, Poplar Fruit didn't let go. His temper rose. Poplar Fruit wasn't stupid. He knew from movies and novels that there was no reason in this kind of place. Only with a strong fist, that's called reason. In the American drama Prison Break, Mi Shui used his clever brain to fool everyone. However, that was made up by people. If he wanted to live comfortably, he had to conquer with force. Cowboy pulled his arm and found that it was stuck between the rocks. He couldn't move Poplar Fruit's right hand. His eyes were red, not because he wanted to cry, but because he felt humiliated and angry. The cowboy stopped talking and went up to Yongwa angrily. He raised his knee and wanted to break Yongwa's balls with one knee. Poplar Fruit's eyes flashed. He slightly moved, grabbed Cowboy's thigh, locked his joint, and then lifted. Poplar Fruit was much taller than Cowboy. With this lift, Cowboy's supporting leg couldn't stand. He was lifted off the ground by Poplar Fruit. Then, Cowboy was like a wheel. His whole body was thrown back and fell to the ground. His hind legs swung down and almost hit Chong X, who was still on the ground. Chong X Leong exclaimed and dodged to the side. Although he was embarrassed, he was not as embarrassed as the cowboy who was flipped upside down. The cowboy was lying on the ground. Just now, his nose rubbed against the ground, and he groaned in pain. As for the other 3 people, some of them were sitting there and laughing as if they were watching a good show. Some of them were expressionless. The tall and strong man in the lead looked like he was watching a gladiator show on TV. He had an indifferent expression on his face. Brother Feng's face was red. He sent Cowboy. Not only did he fail, but he was beaten so badly. Not only did he lose face, but he was also angered by Poplar Fruit, who was an unruly newcomer. "I'm going to fucking kill you." Brother Fong looked left and right. He grabbed a long, twisted towel that was half dry and half wet. He tied a knot at the end and then roared and threw it at Poplar Fruit. This towel was still very vigorous when swung. The moisture increased the weight of the towel and made it more solid. The whole towel was twisted into an iron rod and then tied into a knot. It was like a lightweight version of a mace. Poplar Fruit didn't want this thing to leave a red mark on his body. He suddenly moved sideways to avoid the towel that Brother Fong threw at him. His right hand grabbed Brother Feng's throat like lightning. This action was too fast. Before Brother Fong had time to react, Poplar Fruit started the next action. Poplar Fruit arched his left leg and drew a circle on the ground with his right leg. He went around Brother Feng's heel and slashed hard. Brother Feng's legs were swept into the air, and Poplar Fruit's right hand grabbed Brother Feng's throat and slammed him to the ground. Brother Feng rushed over and didn't understand what was going on. He fell backward like a cloud. His back hit the cold concrete floor of the prison cell without any protection. He almost lost his breath, but his eyes rolled and he screamed in pain. Poplar Fruit's right hand grabbed Brother Fang's neck, and his left hand wanted to punch Brother Fang's right face. However, he stopped in the end. When his fist was only a few millimeters away from Brother Fang, he stopped. The wind of the punch scared Brother Fang. His pants were wet. Fuck, this is fucking bad luck. Everyone saw the yellow liquid oozing out from Brother Fang's pants. They covered their noses and shouted. Poplar Fruit also retracted his hand in disgust. He quickly moved away from this guy and stood aside. Brother Fang covered his face and lay motionless on the ground. He lost a lot of face today. He was scared to the point of peeing his pants by a newcomer. If this spread out, Brother Fang wouldn't have the face to stay in this detention center. Not to mention the name Brother Fang. He was afraid that his nickname would be related to peeing his pants in the future. Brother Fang was beaten so miserably that the third leader didn't dare to go down. He intuitively felt that he was only a little stronger than Brother Fang. He shouldn't be on the same level as Poplar Fruit, so he was very sensible and didn't dare to be in the limelight. Fuck, coward. The second leader looked at the third leader with disdain and jumped down from the upper bunk. He kicked Brother Fang and scolded, "Get out of my way, trash." Brother Fang rolled to the back. The second leader waved to Chong X Liang and shouted, "Chong X Liang, wipe this place clean." Fuck, you're not smart at all. Be careful, or I'll make you squat in the pit again tonight. Chong X Liang hastily ran over and used his own clothes to wipe off the yellow water stains on the ground. He then retreated to the door of the prison cell. This was also Chong X Liang's trick. Prisoners didn't dare to fight at the prison door because it was easy to be caught by the prison guards. He hid in the safest place for fear of being involved. Chapter 366. Fourth update. The moment Poplar Fruit was caught by the big black guy, he knew that he had underestimated his opponent. In other words, the series of easy victories made Poplar Fruit look down on the heroes of the world. It was Poplar Fruit's first time encountering an opponent like the big black guy who was tall, strong, and fast. His previous opponents, whether it was Supin and other Thai boxers from the bank, or Meng Sanhua and other martial arts experts from the special forces, none of them were as tall as Poplar Fruit. Not only was the big black guy much taller than Poplar Fruit, but he was also as tall as the three strong men from the special forces. In terms of strength, Poplar Fruit was confident that he would not lose to anyone. However, he was restrained by the big black guy, so he could not use his strength. Therefore, Poplar Fruit was facing his biggest physical challenge ever since he started practicing martial arts. The big black guy tightened his grip, and Poplar Fruit felt that it was getting harder to breathe. He realized that he could not delay any longer. He had to find a solution quickly, or else he would be strangled to death. Poplar Fruit suddenly shouted. The big black guy thought that Poplar Fruit was going to use his right hand to lift his arms. However, he realized that Poplar Fruit did not use any strength in his hands. Instead, he kicked his legs randomly. The prisoners in the 8th prison laughed proudly. They thought that Poplar Fruit was just struggling. The big black guy's bare hug shocked the entire detention center, and no one wanted to be hugged by him. Poplar Fruit did not succeed the first time, so he tried again. He used his left hand to grab the prison uniform on the big black man's upper body. His fingernails almost dug into the hem of the uniform. He turned the knob so that the uniform had a better grip and wouldn't slip off easily. Poplar Fruit exerted strength in his waist. Relying on his strong waist and abdomen, Poplar Fruit raised his legs up high. Using the big black guy's arms as the axis, Poplar Fruit folded up. His legs were like sharp swords pointing to the sky. It's useless. The big black guy was exerting strength as well. He held his throat and roared. Then, he curled up his arms that were holding on to Poplar Fruit even harder. Poplar Fruit's face started to turn red. It's not over yet. Poplar Fruit shouted in his heart. He used his strength to spread his legs to the sides, as if he was opening up a big fan. At this time, the flexibility of his body that he had trained in Tai Chi showed. His legs were like a professional dancer's, bending into a straight line. The miraculous inverted leg made the prisoners in the 8th prison forget to cheer. They also forgot that the two people in front of them were in a life and death struggle. Poplar Fruit's body performance was like a real artistic performance, and it was breathtaking. Poplar Fruit used his last breath to shout out, and in exchange, he gained a new strength. They saw that his legs, which were originally spread out vertically, were now folded horizontally like a fan. Let's not look into how and out of the scope of people's understanding Poplar Fruit's current actions were. At this moment, his legs were like two thick whips, folded up and solidly slapped near the big black guy's ears. If it were an ordinary person, Poplar Fruit might have twisted his bones or tendons with this kick. However, Poplar Fruit's body was too flexible. Not only did he not feel any discomfort, but the whole process was smooth and smooth. His strength was not reduced at all until the moment of impact. Instead, it became heavier due to inertia. Clang! In the big black guy's perception, Poplar Fruit's kick to him was like his whole body was covered in a big bell and then heavily hit with a club. Even if the big black guy was a person with thick skin and strong resistance to attacks, his head was still buzzing, and he was dizzy. After receiving such a heavy blow, he did not completely lose control of his body. Although he could no longer hold on to Poplar Fruit, it did not prevent him from letting go. His arms pushed Poplar Fruit to the ground, and the sky and earth spun, and Poplar Fruit's head fell to the ground. This was one of the big black guy's 3 axes, to fall and to fall upside down. This was almost a subconscious action, and Poplar Fruit was almost caught off guard, and his hands did not have time to support his head. Just as his head was about to make intimate contact with the floor, Poplar Fruit used his legs to wrap around the big black guy's neck in time. Poplar Fruit's legs were too flexible, and in an instant, they wrapped around the big black guy's neck like a hemp rope and finally stopped his body in the air. Poplar Fruit did not wait for the big black guy to react and stretched out his hands to support himself on the floor. His wrists exerted force, and his whole body was upside down in the air, and he spun 360 degrees in the air to put some distance between him and the big black guy. However, Poplar Fruit counterattack was not over yet. Taking advantage of this position, he suddenly had an idea and took the initiative to attack. His legs were like a metronome as he continuously kicked out. He didn't look, but based on his instincts, he locked the target of his kicks on the big black guy's bald head. The big black guy had never seen anyone attack like this. He had just recovered from the ringing in his ears, and he hurriedly made a move. His hands were like palm leaf fans, and he wanted to stop Poplar Fruit's continuous kicks. It was a good idea, but Poplar Fruit's legs were too fast. Just as the big black guy's left hand was about to slap Poplar Fruit's right leg out, Poplar Fruit's left leg had already arrived. Before the big black guy could pull back his right hand to defend, his head was directly hit by Poplar Fruit's foot. Pah! A crisp sound rang out, and it was like swatting a mosquito. Poplar Fruit's foot landed on the big black guy's head. The big black guy staggered back 2 steps, and a red shoe imprint appeared on his smooth, shiny, black bronze bald head. Poplar Fruit borrowed the force of the big black guy's slap, and his legs drew a beautiful arc in the air with one leg in front and one back. Then, he firmly stepped on the ground and straightened his body. Turning back, Poplar Fruit glanced at the prisoners sitting on the bed and found that they were all staring at him in disbelief. It was indeed unbelievable. This young man, who looked harmless when he first came in, was actually able to successfully escape from the bear hug of the infamous big black guy, Elder Song, and even had the strength to fight back. Looking at the red imprint on the big black guy's head, the funny scene did not make them laugh. On one hand, they were afraid that the big black guy would settle the score with them. On the other hand, they also felt that their understanding of the world had been overturned. What kind of miracle could this young man create? Chapter 367. 5th update. After cleaning up the floor, Number 2 leader patted his chest and walked towards Poplar Fruit step by step with a ferocious smile on his face. He even laughed and said, "Little kid, you're still young, but you've already learned bad things. Later when you get beaten up and cry, Don't cry for your mother. Is there an end to this? Poplar Fruit felt a little annoyed. He had beaten up one person after another. Was he going to take turns and beat them up one by one? When was this going to end? Wait, I'm not going to fight with you. Poplar Fruit shouted and suddenly looked up at the tall and strong black guy. His eyes were full of provocation. I want to fight with you. What? Number 2 leader stopped as if he heard a joke. He laughed and said, You want to challenge our boss? Save it. Number 2 leader suddenly shouted, You want to fight with our boss? You're not qualified. Boss doesn't even need to do anything. I can't beat you until you piss your pants. Poplar Fruit didn't pay attention to him. Instead, he continued to provocatively point at the black guy. He raised his head and said disdainfully, What, you don't dare? Fuck. Feeling that he was ignored, Number 2 leader was very angry. He was ready to rush over and beat up Poplar Fruit. Suddenly, the expressionless big black guy's thighs shook, and he jumped down from the top bunk. His weight of at least 240 kilograms hit the ground. Yongwa felt as if there was an earthquake, and the floor shook. The black guy slowly straightened his back, stretched out his muscular arms, and blocked Number 2 leader's way. He said coldly, He's mine. Number 2 leader was a little unwilling. He felt that he was considered weaker than Poplar Fruit by his boss. He hurriedly shouted, Boss, I haven't fought with him yet. The black guy turned his head and stared at Number 2 leader with his bell-like eyes. He didn't need to say anything. That aggressive aura scared Number 2 leader so much that he quickly shrank back and didn't dare to raise any more questions. However, Number 2 and a few other people also looked at Poplar Fruit with some schadenfreude. The black guy and Poplar Fruit were not on the same level. In their minds, they had already imagined Poplar Fruit being beaten up until he couldn't take care of himself. This wasn't something that had never happened before. Big Black was a felon. He used to be a very powerful character in the army. After he retired from the army, he joined the underworld. There was once a gang fight where he single-handedly killed 10 people with a knife. 8 of them died on the spot. It was obvious how fierce Big Black was when he fought. Later, he hid for a few months, but was still caught by the police with a gun pointed at his head. Because he was involved in the gangsters, the black guy's sentence was still in the process of obtaining evidence and judicial procedures. He had been in this detention center for half a year and had always been a well-deserved prison bully. Usually, when eating, everyone who saw the black guy would take a detour. They were afraid that if they offended him, they would be beaten to a pulp. Don't think that the black guy didn't dare to do it. He was already destined to be a person who couldn't escape the death penalty. Killing one more or one less was just a number to him. In the past, there was a ruthless person in the 8th prison who wanted to challenge the black guy's position. In the end, he was beaten to the ground and had a concussion. If the prison guard didn't come in time, it wasn't impossible that he would have been beaten to death. The black-haired man twisted his shoulders, and the bones in his body made popping sounds. He smashed his fists in front of his chest, making a dull sound. The black-haired man opened his big mouth and cruelly smiled. Then he said in a muffled voice, I, Old Black Song, have killed more than 10 people, but I have never killed a nameless person. What is your name? The black guy gave Poplar Fruit some pressure. This made Poplar Fruit a little dignified. He also circled left and right, seriously preparing. Hearing the black guy's question, Poplar Fruit didn't beat around the bush and directly answered, Poplar Fruit, your kung fu is not bad, but what a pity he... The black guy smiled sinisterly. His meaning was very clear. Poplar Fruit was destined to not be able to beat him. So what if his kung fu was good? In the end, it was still a dead end. The black guy didn't want to let go of anyone who provoked him. Isn't it too early to say this? Poplar Fruit raised his head and looked at him, unconvinced. Ever since he started practicing Tai Chi, Poplar Fruit wasn't afraid of anyone. He hadn't lost to anyone. Moreover, with Xing Yi Fist gradually reaching large success and other kung fu achievements, Poplar Fruit confidence was rising steadily. Although the black guy's body gave him a lot of pressure, Poplar Fruit didn't think that he would lose. No, it won't be long. The black guy laughed. He didn't want to waste time with Poplar Fruit. He roared excitedly and pounced on Poplar Fruit. When a person had a great physical advantage, he would prefer to use his physical advantage to defeat the enemy, instead of using guerrilla tactics to exhaust the enemy to death like Taizu. For the black guy, his most common methods were nothing more than bear hugs, straight punches, and wrestling. He didn't have any moves to speak of. It wasn't that he was lazy and didn't learn any moves. With his body, he could just use his thigh-thick arms to wrap around the opponent like a python. No one could stand it. Needless to say, a heavy punch to the head would result in a concussion if it was light, and death if it was heavy. His strength was so great that if he lifted someone up and threw them to the ground in a wrestling position, Bruce Lee would probably be out of breath. Poplar Fruit habitually moved aside. However, he didn't consider that the black guy was tall and had long arms. Poplar Fruit didn't dodge. He was caught by the black guy, and then his whole body was in a bear hug. Being hugged by the black guy, Poplar Fruit's first feeling wasn't tightness, but smelly. It was too smelly. This big black man with a black chest exuded a stench from head to toe, as if he had not bathed for several months. Especially under his armpits, Yangwa almost fainted from the stench. The big black guy, was like an eagle catching a chick. He was very pleased with himself. He started to contract the muscles in his arms. He wanted to squeeze Yangwa to death, and then beat him up. Although the smell was very disgusting, Poplar Fruit was still awakened by the black guy's rapidly contracting muscles. He opened his eyes and regained his clarity. However, everything just happened too quickly. When Poplar Fruit was hugged by the black guy, he didn't have the best posture to protect himself. His right hand was now in front of his chest, stuck by the black guy, and his left hand was hanging empty under his body. Poplar Fruit's strength was indeed great, but in this posture, he couldn't use any strength at all. Poplar Fruit tried to use the strength of his right hand to push the black guy's arm away. However, his right hand could only use 40% of its strength. It could only slow down the black guy's contraction speed. Huff, huff. Poplar Fruit was breathing rapidly. The situation was very critical. Chapter 368. The big black guy was pushed back by Poplar Fruit. He stood firm and touched the part of his head that was hit by Poplar Fruit. He didn't become angry because of this. Instead, his dark face reflected an excited expression. The big black guy opened his mouth, revealing his black and yellow teeth. He smiled, and his eyes flashed with a bloodthirsty light. The big black guy smashed his fists together in front of him. With a howl, he strode toward Poplar Fruit. His body was too big and heavy. When he stepped on the concrete floor, the ground shook. The prisoners on the bed shrank their heads in fear, afraid that they would be affected. The big black guy's boxing skills were better than moves. However, he didn't punch randomly. He clenched his fists at the two ends of his chin. Every time he punched, he would punch with one hand and block with the other. It was very similar to the standard boxing moves of a boxer on a boxing stage. However, his fists were more fierce and heavier. Poplar Fruit didn't want to take it head-on. He relied on his flexible body movements to dodge. However, the space in the prison was very small. Poplar Fruit took 2 steps back and was about to lean against the iron door behind him. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to use Tai Chi's pushing hands and Xing Yiquan's blocking moves to fight with the big black guy. After 2 moves, Poplar Fruit was enraged by the big black guy. He was too fierce. Poplar Fruit glared at the big black guy with angry eyes. The guy in front of him was like a weapon trained by the dark sect to kill people. Every punch was fatal. If it wasn't the eye socket, it was the sun fist on both sides. Although the big black guy was big and liked to trample on his opponent, he was also very sinister. Sometimes when Poplar Fruit blocked his hands, the big black guy would fly up and hit Poplar Fruit's lower body with his knee. If it wasn't for Poplar Fruit's quick reaction and dodging, the consequences would have been unimaginable, and scrupulous means didn't seem like the style of a martial artist. Poplar Fruit thought bitterly. However, he also understood that the big black guy wasn't a martial artist. At most, he was a scum of society who relied on his body and blood to abuse his power. The big black guy angered Poplar Fruit, and the consequences were very serious. Poplar Fruit panted slightly. His eyes narrowed into slits. He didn't want to be entangled with the big black guy anymore. He shouted in his heart, "Let's end this." Poplar Fruit suddenly stopped fighting like a loach. Instead, he showed an attitude of duty-bound to meet the big black guy head-on. The dark-skinned man roared and punched out with his right fist, bringing with it a frightening aura. If it was an ordinary person, they would have been scared witless before the fist even reached them. However, he was facing Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's left hand shot out like lightning. In an instant, he caught the big black guy's right wrist. With a twist, he removed the strength of the big black guy's heavy fist. Then, Poplar Fruit's left hand gently twisted the big black guy's right hand into a strange position that made him uncomfortable and unable to use force. It wasn't over yet. Poplar Fruit gently tilted his head and avoided the big black guy's left fist. Then he attacked. Before the big black guy could react, Poplar Fruit's right hand had already locked onto his throat. A trace of surprise flashed in the big black guy's eyes. However, before he could make his next move, Poplar Fruit shouted loudly. His whole body burst forth with great strength. He locked onto the big black guy's throat and pushed him back. From the perspective of others, with Poplar Fruit's thin and weak body, it was no different from an ant trying to shake a tree. However, hadn't Poplar Fruit surprised him enough today? Not only did Poplar Fruit shake the big black guy like a mountain, but he also pushed him back very quickly. The fight between the two could be said to have started from the door to the house, and then from the house back to near the door. Now, under the push of Poplar Fruit, the big black guy couldn't stop moving back until he hit the wall closest to the toilet. It wasn't that the big black guy didn't struggle, but the speed was too fast. The big black guy lost his center of gravity and could only wave his left arm in the air to try to balance his body. He hit the wall with a bang, and some dust fell from the eaves. The big black guy finally got a chance to breathe. His right hand was firmly held by Poplar Fruit's left hand, and he couldn't break free. He could only use his left hand to break away from Poplar Fruit's right hand that was locking onto his throat. Ugh! The big black guy used all his strength to break away from Poplar Fruit's wrist, but in the end, it was as if he was grabbing onto an iron arm made of reinforced concrete. No matter how he grabbed and pinched, it didn't move at all. Poplar Fruit roared again and used all his strength with his right hand. The big black guy who weighed a few hundred pounds was pressed against the wall by Poplar Fruit, and he slowly raised one of his hands. The surrounding prisoners' eyes almost popped out of their sockets. This was especially true for leader number 2, who had just wanted to clamor, "If you want to challenge, boss, you'll have to step over my dead body." He sucked in a breath of cold air and felt a little lucky that leader number 2 had taken action for him. Otherwise, he would definitely have died a horrible death. When the big black guy was raised, he saw a violent killing intent in Poplar Fruit's eyes. The big black guy was no stranger to this, because when he was in a killing frenzy, he would also have this kind of bloodthirsty ruthlessness. What the big black guy knew even more clearly was that Poplar Fruit had the urge to kill him. This young man wasn't a weakling who could be bullied by others, but a tiger who had killed people before and wasn't afraid of killing people. The big black guy began to struggle with all his might. If this continued, he would really be killed by Poplar Fruit. He tried to break away from Poplar Fruit's hand, while learning from Poplar Fruit to use his legs to wrap around Poplar Fruit's waist in order to buy some time to breathe. However, Poplar Fruit didn't let him have his way. Poplar Fruit only raised his left knee and blocked the big black guy's legs. The big black guy was wrong. Poplar Fruit wasn't a bloodthirsty person, and he was a little disgusted by killing people. However, he was really blinded by anger now. Now, in Poplar Fruit's mind, there was only the thought of completely defeating this strong man who was a fatal threat to him. Poplar Fruit raised his hand. The big black guy's feet were dozens of centimeters off the ground, and his throat was stuck. Gradually, the big black guy's eyes rolled back, and his legs twitched weakly in the air. The big black guy's vision was already distorted and blurred, and his consciousness was gradually becoming a blank. His last thought was a sad sigh. Old black song, I'm not being ruled by the people, but am I going to die here in the end? Everyone in the prison saw that something was wrong, and they all kept quiet out of fear, not daring to make a sound. Only Chong X, who was as timid as a mouse, knew what was going on. He leaned against the big iron gate, and when he saw what was going on, he banged on the big iron gate with all his might. He screamed at the top of the observation window, "Murder!" Chapter 369. First update. Chong X's miserable scream instantly made Poplar Fruit's eyes regain their clarity. He calmed himself down and looked at the big black guy who had white foam in his mouth. He quickly let go of his hand and let him slide to the ground. Poplar Fruit didn't think much at that moment. It wasn't that he thought of something. He just subconsciously let go of the big black guy. He didn't want to kill anyone. However, looking at the big black guy who gradually recovered his breath and began to cough violently, Poplar Fruit began to have some lingering fear in his heart. Fighting in this place was very common. However, if someone killed someone, no one could escape the punishment of the law. Poplar Fruit was wrongly accused. However, if he strangled the big black guy to death, Poplar Fruit would really commit a big crime. Perhaps even if Big Brother he came, he might not be able to save Poplar Fruit. How could I be so muddle-headed? Poplar Fruit blamed himself in his heart. He also thought of this layer. If I really have to be responsible for my impulsiveness in prison, then what about Kiki? Wouldn't he never be able to see his daughter again? Or even if I see her, I will miss the most adorable childhood of her. And what about Fong Bei? I haven't confessed to her yet. Would she wait for me for so many years? Not to mention whether she would wait or not. I don't have the face to beg for the love of this kind and pure girl. In just a moment, thousands of thoughts flashed through Poplar Fruit's mind. Fortunately, it hasn't caused a big mistake yet. I have to be careful in the future. Poplar Fruit sighed slightly in his heart. What are you doing? What are you doing? Chong Liang's screams attracted the attention of the prison guards because the 8th prison was a place that was prone to trouble. Moreover, a newcomer had just arrived. Although they were instructed to turn a blind eye, they did not go far. When they heard the screams, they took out their stun batons and ran over. One of the prison guards took out his key to open the door. Another prison guard used an electric baton to knock on the observation fence of the iron gate and scolded angrily, "Old Black Song, don't kill him." He thought that the newcomer was being abused. It was normal to be injured and crippled, which was exactly what Ma Kai was looking forward to. However, if someone died, the prison guards would not have an easy time either. After opening the iron door, the door was kicked open impatiently. 2 prison guards rushed in, but the scene in front of them made them stare blankly at the spot. What's going on? The 2 prison guards looked at each other. They read the same question in each other's eyes. Yeah, what's going on? Why was it different from what he had imagined? The one lying on the ground coughing miserably was Big Black, and the one standing on the ground and scathed was actually the new prisoner. Was it the order reversed? The 2 prison guards could not believe their eyes. What's going on? The prison guard captain on duty stood at the door with one hand on the holster at his waist and asked loudly. They did not know what words to use to describe the situation. The 2 prison guards sensibly stepped aside to make way for the captain to see what was going on inside. Poplar Fruit stood still vigilantly, but his muscles were tense. The prison guard captain had a gun in his hand. He did not want to be misunderstood and then be shot unjustly. At this time, Big Black finally recovered and slowly got up from the ground. "Old Black Song." The prison guard captain saw that it was Big Black who was lying on the ground and shouted in surprise. Hee cough cough. Big Black laughed dryly, but it affected his throat and caused him to cough violently. Poplar Fruit felt helpless. He felt that Big Black was definitely going to complain about him. He was almost strangled to death by him, so it would be strange if he would let him have a good time. If he complained, Poplar Fruit could only accept it. However, things were so strange. After coughing a few times, Big Black said unexpectedly to Poplar Fruit, "Hee, just kidding, nothing." His voice was very hoarse. It seemed that Poplar Fruit's attack just now really hurt him. Poplar Fruit's eyes were wide open. He looked at Big Black in disbelief. He did not take the opportunity to retaliate. "Is it really okay?" The prison guard captain looked at Poplar Fruit suspiciously and then looked at Big Black. "It's really okay." Big Black's dark face squeezed out an ugly smile. It was not that he did not want to smile, but every time he wanted to show a flattering smile, it would become so ugly. Okay, if you say it's okay, then it's okay. Let's go. The prison guard captain was too lazy to care about the small friction between the prisoners. He waved his hand and turned to leave. The remaining 2 prison guards hesitated. One of them pointed at Poplar Fruit with a stunned baton and threatened, "Be careful." However, they did not dare to stay any longer. Poplar Fruit was able to beat up Big Black. Even if they had stun batons in their hands, they still looked at Poplar Fruit with fear in their eyes. When they went out, they unwillingly kicked the door that called them over. However, Chong X, who was all bark and no bite, slammed the door shut. After the prison guard left, Poplar Fruit turned to look at Big Black and asked in a deep voice, "Why?" The dark-skinned man rubbed his sore throat and replied in a low, muffled voice, "Things in the cell will be settled in the cell." After he finished speaking, he glared fiercely at Chong X. The ferocity in his eyes showed that he did not treat Chong X as his savior at all. Chong X pulled a long face and shrunk his head. He lay on the ground and did not dare to make a sound. "Then, do you still want to fight?" Poplar Fruit was still a little vigilant. Although his hands were hanging down, his fists were still clenched and ready to move at any time. "No." Big Black laughed self-deprecatingly. "You're strong. I can't beat you. This number is yours." Although he was somewhat unwilling, Big Black was still willing to admit defeat and readily agreed. "I'm not interested in the cell. It's still yours." Poplar Fruit said indifferently, "I already said that I didn't do anything, and I'm not a prisoner." Poplar Fruit did not want to say anything else. Big Black was stunned for a moment. He did not expect that after fighting for so long, he would find out that the other party was not interested in what they were staring at. "Then you'll sleep on my bed?" Big Black asked. Although Poplar Fruit did not fight for power, he could not just order Poplar Fruit around. In front of the strong, he had to have a crawling posture. Poplar Fruit looked at Big Black's bed and thought of the stench on his body. He shook his head and turned to look at number 2, who was sitting on the second-best bed. Number 2 was the first to react. He quickly jumped off the bed and stood to the side with his head lowered. Poplar Fruit turned to Big Black and said, "I'll sit here." After he said that, he gently jumped and his right foot tapped on the iron ladder. He turned around and sat on number 2's bed. Then, he closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. Chapter 370. Second update. Aside from Big Black, who was sleeping soundly on the bed, the other 5 prisoners were all secretly sizing up Poplar Fruit. They didn't dare whisper in private, but from the looks they occasionally exchanged, it was clear that they were still confused. After all, Poplar Fruit's performance really overturned their understanding. How could a guy with off-the-charts fight hide under such a frail body? Poplar Fruit didn't care about their spine. He sat upright on the bed of number 2 and gently breathed in an attempt to calm his agitated mood. It had already been 2 to 3 hours since he was locked up, but Poplar Fruit didn't see a trace of hope of escaping. What were Song Ji-Win and the others doing? At that moment, there was a loud screech of brakes at the main entrance of the police station where Poplar Fruit was previously locked up. A domineering Land Rover stopped in front of the main entrance, completely blocking the main entrance of the police station. The person in the driver's seat clearly wasn't in a good mood. He pushed open the door, jumped out, and slammed the door shut with a bang. Seeing him in his military uniform and fuming with anger, the guard who was about to yell at him shrunk his head back dejectedly. That's right, He Wenjua had arrived. He wasn't alone. 2 people got out of the back of the Land Rover with anxious expressions on their faces. They were Song Ji-Win and Duan Xiueqing, who were being nagged by Poplar Fruit. Not only that, but a slightly fat man also got out of the front passenger seat. Although he didn't have the energy of He Wenjua, he had an awe-inspiring and inviolable temperament as he stood at the entrance of the police station. "Young master He, it should be here." The man pointed at the police station as he spoke to He Wenjua. His tone didn't have much flattery, but he still didn't dare neglect He Wenjua. Although He Wenjua's chest was burning with rage, he was still a lot more amiable with the man. "Old Liu, this matter shouldn't be delayed. Let's move quickly." Old Liu, full name Lucas Shou, had an extraordinary status. He was the deputy director of the Yangchang Municipal Bureau and was in charge of criminal investigation. He could be considered a very powerful person. Before he changed careers, he met He Wenjue once and could be considered comrades in arms. In addition to He Wenjue's terrifying background, when He Wenjue found him, Liu Keshou didn't dare put on any airs. He immediately found someone to find a police station on this street based on the police car license plate number provided by Duan Xueqing and personally brought He Wenjue. Seeing Liu Ke, the old man was dumbfounded. He knew this big shot. In the past, when he came to guide the work, all the leaders in the branch would come to the door to greet him. He quickly opened the door and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. After seeing them go in, he slipped back to a small pavilion and called his leader. The branch director who received the news happened to be in the station. He dropped the phone and knocked over a chair in a hurry. He didn't dare to cry out in pain and ran down on tiptoe to greet them. "Zhou Lubo, how dare you?" Seeing the bureau chief coming down, Liu Keshou shouted loudly. His loud and clear voice rumbled throughout the hall. Director Liu, don't be angry." Zhou Lubo's face was bitter. He ran to He Wenjue and the others and asked, "Tell me first, what did we do wrong? Change it right away. Change it right away." Liu Keshou said seriously, "Are the police under your command the people's police, or the police of that person called Gushida? You brought people directly to the station without distinguishing between right and wrong?" Zhou Lubo was stunned for a moment and asked, "Gushida? Are you talking about the nephew of Deputy Mayor Gu?" "I don't care if he's the nephew of the deputy mayor or not." Liu Keshou glared and scolded. "Can the deputy mayor arrest people without any evidence?" Zhou Lubo realized that he had said something wrong. He said with a sad face, "Director Liu, I really don't know about this. I don't know if the people below did something stupid. Please wait a moment. I'll ask right away." "Ask here." He Wenjue interjected coldly. Zhou Lubo couldn't help but look at Liu Keshou. Liu Keshou glared at him and scolded, "Hurry up and ask." Zhou Lubo casually found a policeman on duty and asked about the situation today. At that time, Hu Chuanxiang and the others were in a mess. Everyone in the police station knew about it, so Zhou Lubo knew about it when he asked. As soon as Zhou Lubo heard that they were taken into the small dark room, he knew what was going on. Zhou Lubo's face darkened, and he quickly took He Wenjue and the others to the interrogation room. There was no one in the interrogation room, but there was a pool of blood on the floor. The chair had been overturned, so it could be seen that something terrible had happened there. When Duan Xueqing saw the blood, her eyes suddenly turned red. He Wenjue picked up the interrogation record that hadn't been put on the table. He was angry, so he grabbed Zhou Lubo's collar and asked angrily, "Where's my brother? Where's Poplar Fruit? How is he?" Liu Keshou saw that the situation was not right, so he quickly came over to hold He Wenjue's hand and advised, "Wenjue, calm down first." After he came in, he couldn't call He Wenjue young master he anymore. "Director Zhou, this police officer." At this time, a young policeman came in and said hesitantly, "I know where Mr. Poplar Fruit went." "Where'd he go?" He Wenjue, Zhou Lubo, and Liu Keshou asked at the same time. The young policeman was so nervous that he stuttered, "Ma Kai asked me to send him to the detention center at the back." Then, he paused for a moment before adding, "Cell number 8. "What? Prison number 8? Zhou Lubo cried out. Liu Keshou and He Wenjue didn't know what prison number 8 represented, but Zhou Lubo knew. "What is the situation?" He Wenjue frowned and asked, "Speak clearly." The young policeman quickly explained what had happened. He wasn't clear about what had happened in the interrogation room, so he could only explain what he had seen. Hu Chuanxiang had an accident. His mouth was full of blood, and Poplar Fruit was electrocuted and unconscious on the ground. Hearing the young policeman say this, Song Jiwen's eyes turned red, and Duan Xueqing couldn't suppress her emotions and started crying. But He Wenjue's eyes flashed with a trace of light. He knew that his little brother was definitely not someone easy to deal with. Would he have suffered a big loss? Probably not. Instead, Hu Chuanxiang, whose mouth was full of blood, was very likely to have been tricked by Poplar Fruit. These two policemen in your bureau, not only did they arrest people indiscriminately, they even tortured them to extort a confession. Lou Cachot looked at Joe Lubo meaningfully, as if to say, as a leader, how do you educate your subordinates? Is it because they are not qualified for this position? I will find someone to educate them for you. Joe Lubo quivered and quickly responded, Director Liu, I will immediately suspend them for investigation. He Wenhua patted the table in the middle of the interrogation room and said seriously, First, let my brother out. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.